Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. First and foremost, please let me know if audio and video both are fine. All good? Two doubts can I ask? Let's discuss the doubts during the break or whenever I give you the time for asking the question. Right. So, yesterday we had discussed some of the key aspects of satellites and the various aspects of satellites and their applications, and where exactly we use satellites and the different types of satellites and orbits that we have. Now, there is just one last kind of orbit that we are left with in discussion, and this is GTO or geosynchronous transfer orbit. Geosynchronous transfer orbit. All right. So, this, when it comes to geosynchronous transfer orbit, just understand why exactly this orbit exists and what is the need for this orbit. Overall, we have different types of launchers. You might have heard of PSLVs and GSLVs and all these. So any launcher does not have a capacity to go beyond a maximum of 2000 kilometers. Now we have learned yesterday that we have low earth orbit, medium earth orbit and high earth orbit, where in case of high earth orbit, the distance or the altitude from the surface of the earth is at 35,786 kilometers. Correct. So now that means that the satellite has to go to 35,786 kilometers. Now the launch vehicle that we are using, the launcher that we are using, the launcher does not have the capacity to go of about maximum of 2000 kilometers. Beyond that it cannot go. All right, it cannot go. So now, in that case, you need something that will carry the satellite from this 2000 kilometers to up to almost about 36,000 kilometers. And this is where, when these vehicles fail, this is where physics picks up. And we use the concept of gravity and the basics of how motions work to ensure that this satellite from 2000 kilometers can be taken up to almost 36,000 kilometers. And this is a kind of orbit that comes into picture here, called as geosynchronous transfer orbit. And that's why the name geosynchronous transfer, because it is an orbit which is supposed to transfer a satellite from low earth orbit to high earth orbit, from a low earth orbit to a geosynchronous orbit. So that's why elliptical orbit, to transfer a spacecraft from low altitude orbit to a higher orbit. Now, if you look at how exactly this functions, this you can say in a manner is the low Earth orbit, and this is where you have the high Earth orbit, that is 35,786 kilometers. So from the low Earth orbit to the high Earth orbit, GTO, the mechanism of GTO will carry the satellite. Now, what exactly do we do? As soon as we reach this point where we know that the satellite launch vehicle does not have further capacity to go into the orbit, into the required orbit, this is where an extra thrust is finally provided, and this extra thrust works along with gravity to ensure that it reaches the required point. And this is purely mathematical calculation that we do with regards to how much thrust is to be provided, where exactly it has to go, what kind of trajectory it has to take, how do we ensure that it reaches the exact given point. So all these things will be calculated, and on the basis of those calculations we finally would provide the required thrust. So overall, just remember that why GTO is required. GTO is required because no launch vehicle no launch vehicle has the capability has the capability to go beyond low earth orbit. All right, so this is required because no launch vehicle has the capacity to go beyond low earth orbit. So to carry a satellite into the high Earth orbit, the mechanism of GTO is required to carry the satellite from the low Earth orbit to the high Earth orbit. All right, so that's why this is something that we do, and there are different types of transfer orbits. This is just one kind of transfer orbit. If you have seen the trajectory of Chandrayaan, have you seen the trajectory of Chandrayaan 2 or Chandrayaan 3, how exactly it has been carried? ISRO had released a video on it, that how exactly the entire path is and how they are reaching the required orbit. Anyone who has seen those videos? Chandrayaan 3, you have seen, Vivek? Good. So those of you who have not seen those videos, you can go to YouTube, and ISRO has put out videos where they have shown how exactly from the Earth to the Moon, how the trajectory of a transfer orbit would carry the satellite. They do something like this, that they would keep on increasing this orbit, and there will be a time when it basically transfers into a lunar orbit and goes towards the required lunar orbit, right? So this is basically what happens. Yeah, it looks like a jalebi. That's correct. So as you can see here, so this is how exactly this transfer orbit works. So there are different types of transfer orbits, and geo transfer orbit or geosynchronous transfer orbit is one of the most widely used transfer orbits, because this is the transfer orbit that will carry the satellites to the required geosynchronous or geostationary orbits. Now, coming to our next segment, and this next segment is about launchers. Now, until now we have understood that there are satellites and their applications, and how the satellites are required and why they're required, and how they are being launched into various different orbits. Now, to launch the satellite does not carry itself to the required orbit. To launch the satellite, you need a launch vehicle or a launcher, and this is what our next segment is, to read about the different types of launchers that India has. So if you see this picture, these are some of the launchers that we have had throughout the history, since we started our own launches and until now. Overall, when we look at all these launchers, we can divide the launchers into three periods. First period is all the retired launchers, the ones that we don't use anymore, but they have been very significant in the development of all the present launchers that India has. And then after that, we have the ones which are operational. These are the operational launchers, meaning that these are the launchers that we are using today. And then there are the ones which are under development, or which are supposed to be for the future launches that ISRO is planning. So when we look at the retired or historic launchers, there are two, that is SLV and ASLV. And apart from that, there are operational launchers where we have PSLV, GSLV, sounding rockets, SSLV, GSLV Mark III, which is also now called as LVM3. So overall, we see that there are all these different launches that India is using currently. And then there are others which are under development right now, where we talk about RLV, Scramjet, and NGLV. NGLV stands for Next Generation Launch Vehicle. So we'll discuss about all these launch vehicles one by one. To start with, we have the historic launchers. Now, these are the launchers that we used in the past, that we are not using anymore. We have used it in the past. So SLV was the first launch vehicle that India had. SLV stands for Satellite Launch Vehicle. So SLV. So SLV-3 was the first launch vehicle that India used, and this was back in 1979. This was back in 1979, and this is where we, for the first time, used our own launch vehicle to launch a satellite. And this was at the time of Bhaskara 1. At the time of the Bhaskara satellite, which became the first Indian satellite to be launched with the help of an Indian launch vehicle. Now, these SLVs, they did not really have a huge capacity. As you can see that they could carry just 40 kg class payloads, 40 kg. Now, back then, there was no concept of nano satellites. That you might think that, okay, fine, it could have been used to launch nano satellites. But back then, there were no nano satellites. Nano satellites are a very recent concept. So back then, there was no concept of nano satellites. So that's why these satellites or these launch vehicles, they did not really have the capacity to launch the required satellites that we were launching back then. Mainly the communication satellites, which were very, very heavy. So we used to get our launches done either by France or by USSR back then. Mostly France, but also USSR. And then after that came ASLV, and ASLV, uh, in this, A stands for augmented augmented satellite launch vehicle. Now, this had a little better capacity, that it could take up to 150 kg class satellites, but even that was not enough, because we had started launching communication satellites and Earth observation satellites. But even for Earth observation satellites, this was not enough, and still it was an improvement. So we can say that, okay, this was the next step for us in the terms of all our launch vehicles. But then after that comes the launchers that we are using today, the operational launchers. And the first name in this operational launchers is sounding rockets. Now, in case of sounding rockets, although you might not have heard of the name sounding rocket, but sounding rocket has been one of the most important launch vehicles that India has had. Do you know what the meaning of sounding is? Yeah, actually, it has nothing to do with sound or noise or anything. Yes, experiment. Girish, you are correct. That this is basically about experimenting, testing. So to sound is to test, to experiment. So sounding rockets, that's why these are experimental launchers. These are experimental launchers, meaning that they are largely used for conducting experiments, any kind of experiment, defense related experiments, space related experiment, climate change related experiments, weather related experiments, atmospheric experiments, any kind of experiments. So these kind of experiments will be done largely with the help of sounding rockets. And that's why you'll be surprised to know that although you might not have heard of the sounding rocket, but sounding rockets have completed more than 200 successful launches in India. More than 200 successful launches, and that too, I'm talking about 2022. So in 2022, we have completed 200 launches of sounding rockets. Now, you don't really come to know about sounding rocket launches, etc., in many cases, is mainly because these are experiments. These are experiments which purely have a scientific base, purely meant for some kind of research or something. And many a times these are defense related experiments. So these will not be told, or these will not be made public, that what kind of experiment happened. So that's why a lot of times, even if these experiments happen and these have been uh, used, it will not really surface in the newspapers as well. But overall, there are more than 200 successful launches that we have done with sounding rockets. So in case of sounding rockets, what we see is that these are largely experimental in nature. Now, overall, when it comes to sounding rockets, after sounding rockets, one of the most important launch vehicles that India has been Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, or PSLV. Now, PSLV has also been called as the workhorse of ISRO. Has been called as the workhorse of ISRO, and for a very simple reason: the amount of launches that we have done with PSLVs, the amount of successful launches that we have done with PSLVs is uncomparable. And at the same time, not only you can say in India, it has been the best launch vehicle, but even if you compare to the world and all the launch vehicles that we have across the world, you'll find that PSLVs have had among the best success rates in the world. So that's why, that because of that success rate, what we have seen is that although PSLVs are meant for polar satellites, or polar, or that is largely low Earth orbits, but we have gone beyond that. we have used PSLVs for a variety of launches. For Chandrayaan 1, we use PSLV. For Mangalyaan, we use PSLV. For Astrosat, we use PSLV. For Aditya L1 mission, we use PSLV. For all the IRNSS satellites, we use PSLVs. So although they are meant for Earth observation satellites and largely meant for all the polar satellites, but we have seen that in a lot of cases, wherever possible, we have tried using PSLVs. If the launch vehicles, I mean, if the satellites are lightweight, if they are not beyond 1500 kg largely, then in that case, we have preferred PSLVs over anything. And that's why it has been called as workhorse of ISRO, that every kind of launch that we wanted, if it was in the capacity of polar satellite launch vehicles, we have done that. And that's why it has become kind of, you can say, an epitome of success for ISRO. It made the name that ISRO has because of its successes, because of the kinds of launches that we have done with the help of PSLVs. And that's why PSLVs have been at the center of a lot of things. For example, during the time of Mangalyaan mission, this first cartoon that you see on the top, this was published in the New York Times. It was published in the New York Times, where they are showing a kind of an elite space club, and they're showing this person who is knocking the door. And as you can see, I mean, for the Westerners, the easiest way to show an Indian would be that just show a cow uh, tied next to that person, and that is what it all means for them. Now, as when it comes to this particular event, this was one of the worst things that they could have done. This was a pure case of how racism works, that you cannot see a country like India joining the same elite, so-called elite space club as these countries are. And that's why they are in all the suits and boots, and according to them, I mean, this, for us, I mean, this is nothing problematic. I mean, the clothes that this person is wearing, it's fine, and having a cow next to this person is also fine for us. But for them, it's different. For them, the from the lens that they see, if somebody is suited and booted, they belong to a certain class, and if not, they don't belong to that class. And unfortunately, this is what it all means to them. And that too, for one of the most respected news agencies in the world, New York Times, so called one of the best and one of the biggest news agencies and in the world. And they published this cartoon. They obviously also apologized for it later, but we also know that that apology means nothing. That if at all you had a basic understanding, you would not have published articles like these and cartoons like these. And there was a lot of negative campaigning that was happening against India back then. That why does a country like India, who doesn't even have enough money to feed its poor, why are you looking at a Mangalyaan mission? Why do you want a Mars orbiter mission? Just go and feed your people first, and then think about space technology. This was the kind of narrative that was being built against India back then, that India doesn't have enough resources and shouldn't even think of uh, a space technology or having a space mission that is looking towards Mars, that is being so aggressive. But the best answer that could have been given, we gave that answer by just launching this satellite successfully at a very cheap rate. This was the cheapest mission to Mars. Per kilometer cost of this Mars mission was perhaps less than what you pay per kilometer to an auto rickshaw. So that was the kind of cost at which we did the launch. India became the first country to be successful to Mars in the first attempt. There's no other country that has been able to be successful to with a Mars mission in the first attempt. We did it. So with all that, you can say that we replied with our success. And there was a very wonderful answer that was published in the Times of India in 2017. And this was at the time of PSLV C37. So PSLV C37, we discussed yesterday also that it carried 104 satellites. 104 satellites in one single attempt. And as I told you yesterday also, that out of these 104 satellites, there were 101 foreign satellites. And that is precisely what this is depicting that this time we are the elite space club, and now all these people who were sitting inside, now they are knocking the door and asking us to get their satellites launched. So wonderful article, or rather a wonderful cartoon that was published in the Times of India, with all due respect to New York Times. So, but we have to realize this, that how exactly the West always will be looking towards East. Not only about India, whether it is India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or even China or even any Asian country or any African country, they would never be able to see us at the same pedestal as they are. They would always look down upon us, and they would always be surprised at any success that we have. So let them be, and fortunately we have been able to do a lot better than what we were doing, and our space technology has been one of the best in the world, and with various different aspects and various different missions we have proved that to be correct. And now we see that this is where ISRO now also starts generating revenue through many of these foreign countries and companies, where, for example, the launch cost of ISRO is extremely low. One of the data that was published in a paper, uh, the launch cost of ISRO is as low as just $15 million per launch. Now you might think that okay, $15 million is a big chunk of money, but when you compare it to the world, so for example, when you look at Ariane 5, which belongs to France, the launch cost is as high as $90 million. Or if you look at some of the Falcon launches that happen, the launch cost is as high as up to $120 million. So whereas many of these launches happening in the West, they are costing up to 90, 100, or even beyond that in $1 million. Our launches are happening in 15 to $20 million, which is almost one fifth or one sixth of the amount of money that they are spending per launch. And that's why we see that a lot of private companies, a lot of foreign private companies also, they have been knocking our doors, that they want to get their launches done with the help of PSLV, because one, PSLV launches are very cheap, and secondly, they have been one of the most successful launch vehicles of the world. Between 2007 to 2017, not a single launch was unsuccessful with PSLV, and that shows the kind of technology that we have been able to build. No other space agency can claim that they have had this kind of success for a decade, and we proved that with our PSLVs. So that's why we see that PSLVs became very, very crucial altogether in our entire system of space technology. Now, overall, when it comes to PSLVs, PSLV has four stages using solid and liquid propulsion systems alternatively. So, four stages. When we use the word stage, the meaning of stage, if I would say that it is basically about the compartments of fuel. So there are four compartments of fuel that we have here, where you have solid and liquid propulsion systems arranged alternatively. So it is basically solid and liquid, like this it is arranged. Now in this particular scenario, so if I just give you a basic idea of how the launch vehicle looks like, this is a typical PSLV. I know many of you would disagree with me that this is not supposed to be PSLV. So this is how the stages are arranged. You have solid and liquid stages. And this is where you keep the payload, that is the satellite basically. So this is how this is what the PSLV looks like. I know this is a basic representation. I took 20 seconds to make this PSLV. ISRO takes up to 6 months to build the same PSLV. So they should contact me if they need my help in future. So now when it comes to PSLV, there are these four stages that we have. First is solid, and then you have a liquid, then you have a solid, and then you have a liquid stage. Now the first stage is a solid stage, where we have hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene, or also called as HTPB. You don't need to remember the name, just HTPB. If you remember, that's enough. So this is where you have HTPB, or hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene, and this is the solid fuel. Now, why? What you will see is that any launch vehicle, whether it is PSLV or even GSLVs and other launch vehicles also, you'll find that the first stage is normally, or in most of the cases, even in case of foreign launches also, most of the cases the first stage is always solid. Now, why first stage is also solid is because of the amount of thrust that we generate out of a solid fuel. Solid fuel always will be able to produce more thrust as compared to the liquid fuels. And when you are at the earth, obviously the gravitational pull of the earth is the strongest. So that's why you need a lot of thrust. And that huge amount of thrust that you need, you probably will not be able to generate with liquid fuel. And that's why solid fuel is the one that is preferred in first stage in most of the launch vehicles. All right. So that's why you'll see that always this first stage will be solid. And then after that, the arrangement depends on what kind of uh, trajectory we want, how we want to keep the trajectory. Based on that, the other stages are designed. But the first stage will always be solid, and mainly because solid provides more thrust. So I'll just write it here. First stage is mostly solid as it generates more thrust than liquid fuel. So this is what first stage is. Second stage basically is a liquid stage, which where you have unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine, or UDMH. UDMH. So this is the second stage. Then again you have HTPB as the third stage, and then you have MMH as the fourth stage. Monomethyl hydrazine. So that monomethyl hydrazine is used as the fourth stage. So in this manner, we have alternatively arranged first, second, third, and fourth. Alternatively arranged, we have all these launch vehicles. So overall, when you look at the launch vehicle in PSLV, there are different variants of launch vehicles. Although you don't need to really know about all this, only one, that is PSLV XL, is very very important. So if you look at PSLV XL, PSLV XL actually has been used for one of the most, or many of the most crucial launches that ISRO has done. The very first launch that PSLV XL had done was this back in 2008, and this was Chandrayaan 1. This was Chandrayaan 1. So in Chandrayaan 1 launch, they have been used, and the last launch, as you see here, this was the Aditya L1 mission. So for many of these crucial launches, we actually have made the use of PSLV XL. So that's why PSLV XL out of all these launch vehicles has been the most important one. And as you can see that after PSLV XL was introduced, there have been a lot of launches that we have done only with the help of PSLV XL. So that's why PSLV XL becomes very, very crucial in this entire journey of PSLVs. So although you do not need to go into the details of what is PSLV XL or G or CA, etc., but just know that PSLV XL out of all these is the most important. Then after that, we have the GSLVs, or geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle. Now this of course will be used for launching the satellites into the geosynchronous orbits. Now to launch the satellites into geosynchronous orbits, generally these are satellites which are communication satellites. And communication satellites, as I stated yesterday also, communication satellites are heavy. They are very heavy, and they are heavier than at least 2000 kg. They can be up to 5000, 6000, or even beyond 6000 kg in their mass. So that's why they are very bulky. And PSLVs, that's why they are incapable of launching a communication satellite. And this is where we made our own satellite launch vehicle, which will be capable of launching communication satellites, and these are GSLVs. Now, in case of GSLVs are three stage. Remember this, that GSLVs are three-stage launch vehicle. Now, in this three-stage launch vehicle, there are three types of fuels that we are using. There is a solid stage, there is a liquid stage, but this time there is a cryogenic stage. So you're using the same HTPB You're using the same UDMH, but this time you are using a cryogenic fuel or a cryogenic stage. Now, what do we mean by cryogenic stage? Because it becomes crucial, because this has been one aspect of our entire development of technology that has been very difficult to get hands to. And cryogenic technology in the world, there are only handful of countries who know how to use cryogenic technology, and now India is one of those countries. And there are only handful of countries. You have the US, now the European Union also has it, Russia has it, China has it, and India. So there are only few countries in the world who know how to make the use of cryogenic technology, and India has become one of the select few countries where we know how to use cryogenic technology. And getting cryogenic technology or development of cryogenic technology itself has not been an easy journey for India. Initially, if you go back into the history and if you read about it, in 1970s itself, we might have gotten the hands to cryogenic technology. Back then, we used to work very closely with France. And in 1970s, many of our scientists used to go to France and help them. Many of the French scientists used to come to India and help us. So there was a very good technology exchange that used to happen back then. A lot of knowledge sharing that used to happen between the Indian and the French scientists. And this is when India also helped France in certain cases. And the first time when India helped France in a very crucial project that they were running, they provided us with technology which was for liquid propulsion system, for carrying out liquid engine to use liquid fuel. We got hands to liquid propulsion technology, and they had an engine called as Viking engine. They provided us the license to that Viking engine, and that Viking engine, we modified it according to our requirements, and that became Vikas engine in India for using liquid propulsion, for using liquid fuels in our launch vehicles. So this was very, very crucial for our own development of launch vehicles. We needed the liquid propulsion system, and we got that liquid propulsion system from France, and then we modified it according to our needs. And today, Vikas engine is supposed to be one of the best variants of liquid propulsion systems available in the world, even better performer than the Viking engine from where we developed this. So we got hands to this. Now again, France asked us for some help, and this time they said that they would give us the cryogenic technology uh, if we help them. But back then we could not. There were other challenges that India was facing, and we were not in a position that we could have helped France. So unfortunately, we could not help France, and that's why unfortunately we could not get hands to cryogenic technology, and that too back in 1970s itself. And then we see that in 1980s, I think 1986, 87, there was a US based company, and they were ready to sell cryogenic technology to India, but at a very, very high cost. And that's why we said that no, right now we cannot spend this much money on this technology. So we refused that offer from the US. So again, this was the second instance where we could not get hands to cryogenic technology. And then there was the then came the same usual Russia or USSR back then. It was about to disintegrate into different countries, and they offered us cryogenic technology for free. They simply started transferring cryogenic technology to India, and India did not have to pay anything for it. But unfortunately, even that could not happen. And this was just about 1989, 1990, when USSR was in a turmoil and it was disintegrating. Now, why they could not provide us this technology this time? Because US intervened. Back then, USSR and USA both were a part of something called as MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime. Both of them were a part of MTCR. Now, as a rule of MTCR, an MTCR country is not allowed to transfer missile technology to a non-MTCR country. All right. So, cryogenic technology was also seen as a MTCR or MTCR technology. Russia being an MTCR member, India not being an MTCR member, Russia was not allowed to transfer this technology to India, and this is only something that happened because US intervened, did not let it happen. So that's why, unfortunately, we see that in terms of security, in terms of defense, US always has been a big roadblock for India. And there have been multiple instances in the past where you'll see that happening. And this was also one of those instances where US became a roadblock for us. But thankfully, what happened is that this is where you can say, in a manner, we realize that we cannot rely on foreign technologies or the intervention of the foreign space agencies. We'll have to work on our own. And we started working on cryogenic technology at this point of time. And in the next 10 years, we were able to build it. And by 2001, we had our own cryogenic engine, our own cryogenic technology. There are unofficial, unconfirmed reports that say that Russia was still helping us behind the scenes, but nobody can ever confirm whether this is correct or not. But this is just a story where it is said that Russia was still helping India, and that is why we were able to get hands to cryogenic technology. Because even if you see, the cryogenic technology that we built is very close to the Russian model. The cryogenic engine that we have been using in our geosynchronous satellite launch vehicles, they are very similar to the Russian technology. And that is where it is also said many a times that Russia might have helped India. But we do not know, and we would neither confirm nor deny that whether something like this happened or not. So this cryogenic technology became very, very crucial. Now, this, when we say cryogenic, understand the meaning of the term cryogenic. Wherever you see this term cryo, CRYO, cryo means any technology that is working at extremely low temperature. Extremely low temperature. So any technology that works at extremely low temperatures, minus 150, minus 200, minus 250 degrees Celsius, that kind of technology will be called as cryogenic technology. And that's why this fuel has been named as cryogenic fuel, because we use a mixture of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen in this fuel. And to liquefy hydrogen, you have to go beyond minus 250 degrees Celsius. And for liquid oxygen, you need minus 150 degrees Celsius. So that's why it's cryogenic. That's why it is cryogenic, because you work at extremely low temperature in case of cryogenic engines. Now, why cryogenic? Because cryogenics can give you a lot of thrust. It can give you a lot of thrust, and it is that's why capable of carrying bigger loads, heavier loads, as compared to liquid fuel. So that's why cryogenic technology becomes very, very crucial in this context of carrying bulkier loads. So this is where we see that development of cryogenic technology happened, and this is how the development of GSLVs could happen in India. Now, when it comes to GSLVs, there have been three variants of GSLVs that we have used over the years: GSLV Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3. Now, GSLV Mark 1 is where we were using Russian cryogenic engine. So this was based on Russian cryogenic engine, and Mark II was when, for the first time, we had an Indian cryogenic engine. For the first time, we had Indian cryogenic engine, which was more or less based on the Russian counterpart. If you look at the data with regards to Mark 1 and Mark 2, you'll see that they are very similar. Height is same, lift off mass almost the same, number of stages same, payload that they can carry to low Earth orbit, payload that they can carry to geosynchronous transfer orbit. You can see that all this data is almost similar. But then comes Mark 3, and Mark 3 is a much better variant as of cryogenic engine as compared to Mark 1 and Mark 2. So that's why this time we have been able to do much better. If you look at the data, lift off mass is better, payload that they can carry to low Earth orbit is better, payload that can be carried to GTO is better. So that's why overall we see that they all have been, I mean, Mark 3 has been very, very crucial. Now this GSLV Mark 3 is now also called as LVM3, that is Launch Vehicle Mark 3. So that's why this name LVM3. So LVM3 is called as LVM3 mainly because many scientists at ISRO say that look, when you compare to Mark 1 and Mark 2, there is nothing which is similar. Height, the structure is different, the cryogenic technology is different, the lift off mass is different, everything is different. So it's not just because there is cryogenic stage in the third stage, we should not call it as a version of GSLV, but rather we should call it as an independent launch vehicle. So that's why you'll see that at many places they would not call it as GSLV Mark 3, but instead of that, they call it as Launch Vehicle Mark 3. So that's why there is a slight change in nomenclature that they are using. But for all practical purposes, whether you read GSLV Mark 3 or you read LVM3, they basically mean the same thing. They are the same launch vehicles, just that the nomenclature is different. The naming is different and nothing else. Read this question, please. I'll launch the poll for you. Please mark your answers. Hmm. So 57% of you have marked A, and that is the correct answer. Question says, with reference to India's satellite launch vehicles, consider the following statements. First statement says PSLVs launch satellites useful for Earth resource monitoring. This is fine because we discussed that they are Earth observation satellites. So this is correct. GSLVs are designed mainly to launch communication satellites. This is also correct. We discussed about this. So one is correct. Second statement. Satellites launched by PSLV appear to remain permanently fixed in the same position in the sky as viewed from a particular location on the Earth. This cannot be correct. This cannot be correct. Why? We are saying permanently fixed. What did we discuss? That PSLVs will launch satellites into the polar orbits, right? And in the polar orbits, if you remember, we discussed that the time period of revolution is just 1.5 to 2 hours. So one revolution is getting completed in 1.5 to 2 hours. So that's not possible. And we discussed that they would appear overhead one particular location once in a day. Correct? So I gave you the example that if today at 10 a.m. it is coming overhead, tomorrow again at 10 a.m. it will come overhead, again 10 a.m. overhead, and this is what will keep on happening. What remains permanently fixed? Geostationary Earth orbit. That's why it is geostationary. Correct? It is geostationary. So that's why permanently fixed. Stationary. Stationary means what? That it is stagnant at one position. So that's why it is geostationary Earth orbit. It is the one that remains permanently fixed because it has, what is the time period of revolution? 24 hours. That's why synchronized with the Earth. So that's why it will remain permanently fixed. So that's why this is wrong. GSLV Mark III is four-stage launch vehicle with first and third stages using solid rocket motors and the second and the fourth stages using liquid rocket engines. Now, this was a very, very easy statement to mark. GSLV Mark III, we just discussed GSLV Mark III is how many stages? Three stages. It's just three stages. What exactly is this launch vehicle? Four stages with first and the third using solid and second and the fourth using liquid. Which one is this? Yes, it is PSLV. This is not GSLV Mark III. This is very simple. This is PSLV. And you could have gotten the answer only from this statement. So statement number 2 is not even required to mark your answer. And statement number 3 is the easiest statement out of these three statements. So just be very careful in launching, sorry, not launching, but marking in these marking statements in these kind of questions. So any question if you have from whatever we have discussed until now about PSLVs, GSLVs, etc. But NASA has very superior quality launch vehicles as compared to ISRO. Why we don't work for our vehicles quantity for successful launches? No, why would you say that they have superior quality? We have one of the best quality engines or technologies in the world. I don't believe that there is any problem with the technology. I'll tell you where we are lagging. We are lagging in the number of launches, and we are lagging in the number of launches because we are not spending that much amount of money. We don't have that much amount of money and that much budget for our space vehicles. And also a lot of launches that they are doing, they are mostly related to space research. A lot of their launches are related to space research, and that is beyond the requirements of people of the US. Here in India, when it comes to, when you look at the vision of ISRO, and we'll discuss about that in some time, ISRO has set out very clear goals that will be launching satellites that are required for Indian society, for agriculture, for weather monitoring, for disaster management, for resource management, or all these kind of things, for urban development, rural development, for communication and for navigation, etc. So ISRO has set out very clear goal, clear objectives that we are going to work for Indian society more, and only few missions will be taken that are beyond that. And also the budget requirements for a lot of these missions are huge. For example, the upcoming Gaganyaan mission, the official data says that it has a total budget of 10,000 crore rupees. 10,000 crores. So that's why these are huge missions and they cost a lot. And that is why the number of launches are pretty low. But if we were using that much amount of money, then in that case we would also have been able to do better launches and more launches. But technology wise, quality wise, we are not lagging. If no launch vehicle has the capability to go beyond LEO without help of GTO, then why we mentioned that GSLV as HEO launching vehicle? Because see, GSLVs only have the capacity that at least you can go to or till GTO, and from there on carry it. So technically, you are correct that the carrying capacity is up to GTO, and that is what we had seen here also. That we are talking about how much it can carry up to GTO. But if you are launching any geosynchronous satellite or geostationary satellite, GSLVs are the ones that you will be using. So services of GSLVs are required for launching these satellites. We are not saying that the GSLV will go there. GSLV will be used to launch a satellite that will go there. So there's a difference, slight difference in what we are saying. Do we need to learn all these details of the launchers like height, weight, etc.? No, you don't need to learn the height, weights, but these two are important. How much payload they can carry, that's important. Number of stages what GSLVs and PSLVs have, that's important. Height and weight, etc., they are not important. Agni 3 comes under defense or space technology. It comes under defense. All the Agni missiles are a part of DRDO's efforts, so it comes under DRDO. Which launch vehicle is used for Chandrayaan 2? So see, in all these launches that we have been doing, it simply depends on what exactly or what was the weight of the launch vehicle. Now, in case of Chandrayaan 2, so Chandrayaan 2 basically was the one that has been partially successful, you can say. And there we had used GSLVs, and GSLVs were used to launch the required satellite into the orbit. So overall, GSLV Mark III have been used in these kind of launches. And also remember simple things that weight, for example, Chandrayaan 2 had a total weight of almost 3,800 kg. So 3800 kg, you can only use GSLVs, you cannot use PSLVs for that. What is the difference between sun synchronous and geosynchronous? Completely different. Sun synchronous are polar orbits. They would complete their one revolution in just 1.5 hours. Geosynchronous is synchronized with the rotation, nothing to do with the earth, nothing to do with the sun. So that's why they would complete their one revolution in 24 hours. So there's a huge difference, and they are equatorial in their nature, whereas sun synchronous, they are polar in their nature. So they are completely different. Please teach us how to write answers about Aditya L1. I'm preparing for 2000. So, see, Aditya L1 depends on what kind of questions come. The very first thing that you should know are the basic objectives. That these are the objectives of Aditya L1. Plus, at the same time, you also need to know about uh, when it comes to Aditya L1, what are the different payloads that we have used in Aditya L1? So various objectives that we are, what are we going to gain out of Aditya L1 mission, and what are the various payloads that have been used in Aditya L1 mission that will help in the mission's success or whatever work it is supposed to do. So that's these are the things that you have to learn. Please tell us Nambi sir's story in brief. So uh, when it comes to his story, basically he has been the charge of cryogenics in India, and the entire thing that we discussed about cryogenics, it has been one. He has been, you can say, the most important person in this entire journey of the development of cryogenics that happened in India, and has been under controversy because there, unfortunately, there were a lot of things that were done against him to also stop him from doing a lot of uh, things that he was doing, a lot of efforts that he was making. And but ultimately, when it comes to not only cryogenics, but even when it comes to the liquid propulsion systems that we have developed, he has been one of the most important people for ISRO in making sure that all these technologies develop in India with the help of Indian technology and with the help of Indian scientists. So that's why he, being a lead in all these cases, has been very, very crucial part of this entire development. There's a very wonderful book written on all these stories, a book called, the name of the book is ISRO, A Personal Story. So if you are interested in knowing everything that happened in 1970s and 80s and 90s, this is a wonderful book to read. ISRO, A Personal Story is the name of the book. What is payload? Payload basically means anything that is the basic agenda of that launch. So all the instruments that you are carrying, the satellite that you are carrying, all these will be called as payload. From this table, what kind of questions can come? See, from this table, only thing that they could ask is about all these three parameters. So if at all they have to ask, these are the things that they would ask. What is the mechanism of launching a satellite? What we discussed yesterday, that the forces have to be balanced. The centripetal force has to be balanced with the centrifugal force, and at whatever point you are able to do that, you will be able to uh, use. You will be able to launch the fuel. Sorry, you will be able to launch the satellite at the required location. So it's only about balancing the forces. That's what you have to understand. Hmm. On what fuel that DRDO missiles are launched? So see, in DRDO missiles, there are some solid, generally solid fuels are being used in most of the cases, and in some cases, liquid fuels are also being used. Largely, when it comes to the missile fuel, you'll see that they will be using solid fuels only, because they need a very huge amount of thrust to give them that speed, to give them that edge. We see that in a lot of cases they will be using solid fuels. So largely they will be using solid fuels. But in cases of certain missiles, wherever the number of stages are higher, there are certain missiles which are three stage missiles or two stage missiles. That is where you'll see that liquid fuels are also used. Otherwise, in most of the cases, it will be solid fuel only. Leaderboard I'll show you towards the end. When everything is done, I will do this towards the end. Agni 5 missiles. See, Agni 5 missiles are, you can say, the best missiles with regards to the range that they can cover. They can cover, officially it is said that they can cover up to 5500 kilometers, although unofficially it is said that it can go beyond 8000 kilometers. But DRDO does not say 8000 kilometers, the government of India does not say 8000 kilometers, because that can become controversial. In the past it has become controversial whenever we said that we are having intercontinental ballistic missiles that can go up to 10,000 kilometers. That became very controversial, because a lot of European countries and the US started saying, why do you even need a missile like that? All your enemies are sitting in your neighborhood, so why do you need a missile that can launch 10,000 and 12,000 kilometers? So that's why we saw that all these controversies happened in the past. So even if it has a range of, let's say, 7,000, 8,000 kilometers, officially we never say that. China, for example, last year had claimed that Agni 5 missiles have a capacity of 8,000 kilometers, and India is lying. India is not telling the world the truth about Agni missiles. So these kind of things keep on happening. The last three parameters basically stages means what? The compartments of fuels, that these are the compartments in which you will fill up all the fuel and oxidizers. Payload is the satellite that you are carrying. So when we say payload to satellite, it is 5 tons. 5 tons means 5000 kg, that they can carry 5000 kg to low earth orbit. Similarly, when we say 8 tons, means that they can carry 8000 kg to the low earth orbit. So in this manner we see that this is how we look at the payloads. So payload to low earth orbit and payload to GTO. Mark 3 belongs to which country? It belongs to India. It has been indigenously developed by ISRO in India. I'm feeling difficult to study launches and missiles. These are just facts. You just go through it once, you revise, you will find it easy. Don't worry. Right? So let's move to the next question. Is James Webb Telescope orbiting in space? James Webb Space Telescope basically is in L2, at the L2 point. So it remains there. Which rocket was used for Chandrayaan 3? It was LVM-3, or GSLV Mark 3 as we call it. Right. So next we have Vikas engine. Now Vikas engine basically is the engine that is required for carrying liquid fuel. All right. It is the one that is required for carrying liquid fuel. And as I told you that it was a licensed version of the Viking engine that we got from France. And now it is being used in both PSLV and GSLV, where we see that in the liquid stages, wherever we have the liquid stages, whether it is PSLVs or GSLVs or wherever it is, we see that they would be used wherever liquid fuels are required. Then after that, now we have small satellite launch vehicle, that is SSLV. Now small satellite launch vehicle basically is carrying, it has a capability of launching up to 500 kg of satellite. Largely it has been produced so that we can launch all the smaller satellites, all the micro and the nano satellites. For that, this small satellite launch vehicle has been developed by ISRO. And this is where we see that now we get a lot of private capacity as well, that a lot of private launches can be done with the help of these small satellite launch vehicles. So that's why they become very, very crucial in the entire context of the launch vehicles or the launch of the private private satellites. So in this case there are three stages, and all these three stages, they are solid stages. So there are three solid stages, plus there is one liquid propulsion based something called as velocity trimming module. So velocity trimming module is placed along with the satellite, and this is the module that helps in placing the satellite in the required orbit. So that's why the last part is velocity trimming module. Now overall, when we look at SSLV, it becomes a low cost with low turnaround time, good flexibility in accommodating multiple satellites, launch on demand facilities, minimum launch infrastructure requirements. So everything that, if you remember, whatever we discussed about nano satellites, that how nano satellites will bring in a lot of market and a lot of advantages. That is where we see small satellite launch vehicle, because small satellite launch vehicles will be capable of launching these satellites. Now this is where another news that we have seen is this, that ISRO wants to transfer SSLV to private sector, and there are 23 private companies that are in race for SSLV technology transfer from ISRO. Now this perhaps is the first time in the world that some space agency would have done this, that we developed SSLV, but now we are saying that we don't want to keep on operating SSLV, we will give it to some private company, and this private company will have all the ownership of launching SSLV and all the private dealings that it needs to do. So all the private launches, all the smaller launches that any Indian or foreign company or any other country needs to do, they can go to this company and they can uh, talk to that company, and ISRO will not be taking charge of SSLV directly. So this is where, in a manner, you can say that more participation of the private entities is being called for by ISRO. And in the present and in the past few years, we have seen that these kind of efforts have been rising, where ISRO has been subletting a lot of work to the private companies, to a lot of newer companies that have been set up. And this is where we see that this entire space segment now has started developing in India, because until now it was a lot of controlled environment under which all these launches were happening. But now we see that we are trying to move beyond that, and we are trying to follow a model that is being followed in the US or in Europe, in these kind of countries. So maybe this is where we see that it will lead to the growth of space sector in India altogether, and better and more companies will start coming in, and more job opportunities will also be created, because the requirements will rise, and as the requirement rises, the requirement for human capital will also rise in these cases. So it will not be only about scientists and engineers who will get a lot of opportunities, but a lot of people in every part of operation and management will also get a lot of opportunities. So this is perhaps one of the things that is in the mind of ISRO, that how exactly they need to or they want to carry the things forward. Now coming into the future of launches, when we see one of the most important technologies has been scramjet. Now scramjet stands for SC ramjet, that is supersonic combustion ramjet engine. So this stands for supersonic combustion supersonic combustion ramjet. Supersonic combustion ramjet. So now this basically is a technology that where we are using something called as air breathing jet engines. Ramjets basically are called as air breathing jet engines. Now when we say air breathing, it means that they would use air, or they would use oxygen that's there in the atmosphere, instead of carrying oxidizers. Now understand this, every launch vehicle carries fuel and also carries a lot of oxidizers. All right, it carries a lot of oxidizers. Now these oxidizers, why do we need oxidizers? Because oxidizers help in combustion. Oxidizers help in combustion. Similarly, oxygen helps in combustion. Even if, let's say, you are lighting a matchstick, You are able to light that matchstick because there is oxygen in the atmosphere. If suppose that our atmosphere did not have oxygen, right? If it did not have oxygen, then any combustion wouldn't happen. So combustion can only happen in the presence of either oxygen or anything that can act as an act as an oxidizer, or meaning they can act similar to oxygen. So anything that can act similar to oxygen, only that can help in fueling something. So that's why in this context, when we look at fuel plus oxidizer plays a very, very important role. But in the launch vehicles, the weight of oxidizers itself is very heavy. Oxidizers occupy a lot of space and a lot of mass in the launch vehicles. So that's why, because they make the entire launch vehicle very bulky. So now, if let's say we have a technology where we don't have to carry the oxidizers, and instead we can use oxygen from the atmosphere, that would mean that this is where we'll be able to be more efficient altogether, right? We'll be able to become more efficient, because instead of using oxidizers, we'll be able to use oxygen from the atmosphere. We'll be able to use atmospheric oxygen, and that's why we are calling it as an air breathing jet engine. So that's why it uses oxygen present in the atmosphere as oxidizer instead of carrying the oxidizers. So that's why this increases the efficiency of the space launch vehicles by increasing the carrying capacity. So overall, there are multiple advantages that we get. That first, it increases the carrying capacity. It increases carrying capacity. It becomes, because it becomes less bulkier. Then at the same time, what we see is that you save fuel also, because now the weight is less. If the weight is less, fuel required to provide that thrust is also less. So overall, it saves fuel, and that's why it is something that saves cost as well. It can be done at a lower cost because lesser is required. So that's why lower cost. And then, because requirements are lesser, that's why there are environmental benefits as well. There are environmental benefits as well. So there are overall all these things that we can see, and that's why they will be useful in a lot of these kind of vehicles. Now, overall, what we have seen is that we already have tested it back in 2016. We successfully tested the scramjet engine, and it worked very well. And since then, we have been in a development mode. Very recently, also last year, also scramjet was tested by ISRO, and it is speculated that in the upcoming launch vehicles, the newer launch vehicles that ISRO is planning, scramjet might become a very important part of it. At the same time, scramjets are not only being used in the space vehicles, but also in the missiles. Even in case of BrahMos missile, we are planning that BrahMos missiles will also be tested along with scramjet, because that will also make the missiles lighter, and hence they'll be able to transfer faster and farther, both at the same time. So that's why it's a technology, although developed by ISRO, but a technology that has also been passed on to DRDO, so that DRDO can also work on missile technologies with the help of scramjet. So overall, when it comes to scramjet, what we see is that scramjet is something that looks like this: that you would have an inlet body, and the air basically enters from this side. Air enters from this side, and now what happens is, at this point, this air is highly compressed. Correct? It is highly compressed, and the movement is in this direction. So movement is in this direction, air is coming from that side, so that's why air gets compressed. And as the temperature increases, this is where fuel will be injected. So fuel comes in contact with oxygen from the atmosphere. It helps in the combustion of this fuel, and this launch vehicle, or rather this engine, will keep on running further. So this is how we are. This is a typical basic concept of how scramjet is supposed to work. That on one end you are going to launch. I mean, this engine is going to move forward like that. Air is coming from that end. Air enters this engine, gets compressed, temperature increases, fuel is injected. So as fuel comes in contact with oxygen at high temperature, fuel combustion starts, and as the combustion starts, the engine keeps on running forward. So in this manner, scramjet works. This is how scramjet works. So this technology is a technology for the future of the launch vehicles that ISRO is planning. Similarly, there is also a plan for reusable launch vehicle. Now, in case of reusable launch vehicle, also we have done a test back in 2015 successfully, and since then we have been developing it, and this will also be used in the upcoming launches as it is speculated. So this is how it is supposed to work, that it will launch the satellite, and this launch vehicle will drop to the Bay of Bengal, and as it drops to the Bay of Bengal, this is where it will be collected and it will be reused. So it can be reused multiple times, and that's why it will also be able to save us cost, save us time, etc. So all these things can be done with the help of RLV. And again, RLV testing also has happened last year again, where we have been testing the technology with some newer fittings in the all the instruments and the newer instruments that have come into the picture. So that's why they all become very, very crucial in the send in the future of the launches. Now this is where it comes to NGLV, or next generation launch vehicle. Now, this next generation launch vehicle hasn't been officially announced, but it is something that ISRO scientists have been talking about here and there in some seminars, in some conferences, etc. NGLV has been mentioned. Now, this NGLV is supposed to be a very bulky launch vehicle that can have a capacity of carrying up to 10,000 kg to GTO. Until now, with GSLV Mark III, we have a capacity of to 4,000 kg to GTO. Now, this is supposed to carry up to 10,000 kg to GTO. So, this is huge, where we are talking about a cost efficient three-stage reusable heavy lift launch vehicle capacity of 10 tons to geosynchronous transfer orbit, where it might feature a semi cryogenic propulsion. Now, semi cryogenic propulsion also has been tested last year, and this semi cryogenic basically means that they are going to mix kerosene. Kerosene is supposed to be used along with the cryogenic fuel, and that's why it is called as semi cryogenic. So this semi cryogenic also has been tested last year by ISRO. So because of all these testings that they have done, it is speculated that NGLV is supposed to come soon, and this NGLV will just replace everything, replace PSLVs, replace GSLVs, and this will become the only launch vehicle that India has capable of carrying all the kinds of satellites, whether a polar satellite or an equatorial satellite, whether it is a geosynchronous satellite or an Earth observation satellite, whatever kind of satellite it is, this one launch vehicle will have a capacity to launch any kind of satellite that we need to launch. So this is where we are with regards to NGLV. And then looking at, just to summarize all the fuel that we have discussed, we discussed about HTPB. Where are we using HTPB? We are using it in the first and the third stages of PSLVs, in the first stage of GSLVs, and in all three stages of SSLV. Similarly, we have UDMH. So UDMH is being used in the second stage of PSLVs and GSLVs, right? Then we have MMH. MMH is being used in the fourth stage of PSLVs and the velocity trimming module of SSLVs. So these are the these are the fuel. So HTPB basically is a solid fuel, whereas UDMH is a liquid fuel, and also MMH is also a liquid fuel. Then apart from that, we have LOX and LH. LOX basically is the liquid form of oxygen that is used as oxidizer in the cryogenic engine. So if you remember, what I told you is that cryogenic engines they would be using a combination of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, where liquid oxygen acts as an oxidizer and liquid hydrogen is the fuel. So that's why it is liquid form of hydrogen used as fuel in the cryogenic engine. And as I already told you, that for oxygen you need minus 150 degrees Celsius, and for hydrogen you need minus 250 degrees Celsius. So this LH plus LOX, this basically becomes the cryogenic. This becomes the cryogenic fuel. So this is how the things are. And then we have MON. MON stands for mixed oxides of nitrogen. Basically, mixed oxides of nitrogen are used as oxidizing agents or oxidizers. So they become the oxidizers in all the solid and the liquid fuels that we are using, a mixture of nitrogen oxides. So you have nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, dinitrogen tetroxide. So all these basically are mixed together, and the mixture of these nitrogen oxides, they are used as oxidizers in most of these launch vehicles. So this is how we have all these fuels which are also a part of this entire setting in our space agency. So any question from here? All the fuels, etc., whatever we have discussed. Why solid fuel HTPB is required in all three stages of SSLV as small satellites are launched? See, in many of these cases, when we are launching or when we are designing the satellite launch vehicles, it is dependent on what kind of launches we want, how much, what kind of thrust we want to provide, and the kind of control that we want to provide. Now, although HTPB is used, but HTPB is not used in that much huge amount that we use in PSLVs and GSLVs. A lot lesser amount of SSLVs will be used. So whenever these decisions are made, they are made on the basis of what the efficiency would be, how much of fuel will be required, what is the cost of using the fuel. For example, using solid fuels are way cheaper as compared to using a liquid fuel or a cryogenic fuel. So that's why solid fuel will bring down the cost compared to using liquid or the uh, cryogenic fuels, and that becomes the primary reason why we would prefer solid fuel over any other fuel. Once about the LOX. LOX basically, as we discussed, LOX basically stands for liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen. That's why LOX. So this LOX becomes the oxidizer. It is the oxidizer that you are using in the cryogenic fuels, or the cryogenic engine is using LOX as the oxidizer. So that is it. Can you repeat the last slide, please? So this is the last slide where we talked about LOX, LH, and MON. LOX is the oxidizer. This is the oxidizer that you are using in the cryogenic fuel, where we discussed that it's a mixture of LH and LOX, where LH stands for liquid hydrogen, that becomes the fuel for the cryogenic engines, and LOX is liquid oxygen, which is the oxidizer for the engines. And MON stands for mixed oxides of nitrogen, basically a mixture of all the different types of nitrogen oxides which are used as oxidizers both in PSLVs as well as in GSLVs. Do we need to remember all the fuels? Yes, about the fuels you should know, because these are things that will once in a while also come in the newspapers. So you should just know the basics of what these fuels are and where exactly they are being used. Voice issue. I, is there a voice issue? Is anyone facing voice issue? Because Anubhav, you are told that you are facing the issue. Anubhav, can you check on your end? It probably would be an issue with your setting or something with your connection. LOX, LH, and MON are fuels used in cryogenic fuel. No, no, no. LOX and LH, these are used in cryogenics. These two are used in cryogenics. MON is, so this will be used in cryogenics. MON will be used in PSLVs and GSLVs. Please show the fuel slide. This is the fuel slide. Look, this is the other fuel slide. We need to remember all other SLV, ASLV, PSLVs, etc. See, SLV and ASLV may not be important, but apart from that, all the operational and the future launchers and everything that we have discussed, they will be important, because every now and then there is something that comes in the news. As I told you that test of scramjet has been in the news, test of RLV has been in the news, test of semi cryogenics have been in the news, GSLVs have been news in the news because of Gaganyaan mission. And you'll see, I mean, if you just look at last 2 months of the Hindu newspaper, you'll find at least 6 7 articles where they have mentioned something or the other about the GSLVs. So that's why these are constantly coming back and back again in the newspapers. So that's why I would say that they are important. Why scientists are not trying something like renewable fuel for satellite launching, or they are present enough? So see, the problem rather with renewable fuel is the amount of thrust that you can generate. Generally, the main problem with any rocket fuel is that you need to generate a lot of thrust. A normal petrol and diesel even cannot produce that kind of thrust that is required. So you need very special fuels that can provide you that thrust. And unfortunately, many of them, they cannot provide the required thrust. Now, when you use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, that is one step towards, you can say, less uh, polluting fuels. But if you think of, let's say, biofuels, etc., they are not capable. They are not capable because the thrust that they will provide will be extremely low. They can be enough for running vehicles, they cannot be enough for running a rocket. What does ramjet mean? Ramjet means, see, in any air breathing engine, any air breathing jet engine, meaning that any engine that can survive on oxygen from the atmosphere will be called as a ramjet engine. If oxidizer is not carried in scramjet, then how combustion will take place where there is no oxygen? Good question, Krishika. But what happens here is that out of the 4 stages that we have, or let's say the 3 stages that we have, we will plan scramjet only for the areas where you have atmosphere. So when the rocket is going beyond atmosphere, of course there is no oxygen, so we cannot use scramjet there. So maybe only in the first stage we can use scramjet, but even using scramjet in the first stage itself will be able to save us a lot of fuel and a lot of cost. Can liquid oxygen provide thrust? No, liquid oxygen is just an oxidizer. It cannot act as a fuel. Thrust can only be provided by a fuel. So you need some kind of fuel to provide that thrust, otherwise, it's not possible. Why ISRO is selling SSLV? Uh, it is, you can say, an effort of ISRO to help the private sector or grow the private sector in India. That they want a better ecosystem altogether with regards to the private sector in India, and that is exactly the reason why SSLV is being provided to the private sector. Hmm. So next up we have Indian Space Research Organization. Now, when we talk about ISRO, first thing and probably the most important thing to know about ISRO is the vision statement: to harness space technology for national development while pursuing space science research and planetary exploration. Now, this is very, very important, that the primary objective that ISRO has is national development, that they'll be launching and using satellites for national development first while pursuing space science research and planetary exploration. And this is what sets the entire agenda. As you can see also, that there are only limited number of satellites that we have launched which are related to some kind of space mission. In most of the cases, these are satellites and missions that are required in one way or the other for the Indian society. So they are looking towards national development, development of the Indian society, help Indians in one way or the other, and that's why all these things that are being done in that effort. Now, mission not very important, but mission is nothing but all the things that they are doing: design and development of launch vehicles, design and development of satellites, INSAT series satellites, all the remote sensing satellites, space-based applications, research and development in space science and planetary exploration. So basically, everything that ISRO is doing, that all has been listed out as mission. But so mission statements are not that important for you. You don't need to remember all this, but vision is very, very important. This one line you should remember, just in case, let's say you get any question with regards to ISRO or with regard to any scientific development in India or scientific infrastructure in India. So with regard to all that, if you get something, then in that case this one line becomes very crucial, and if you can quote this one line, it will help you enhance your answer and write a better answer altogether. It's not something that will be asked in your prelims examination as such, but in the mains examination, these kind of statements can have a very huge weightage. Now, when we look at ISRO, understanding the organizational structure of ISRO is very, very important. And there are certain uh, units as a part of ISRO which have very crucial roles. They play very crucial roles. So, what are they? Just try to understand them. So, first, for example, is Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, VSSC. This is Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Now, all the long forms have been given there in this particular picture itself. So, VSSC stands for Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, and this is required, or this is the unit for everything with regard to all the launch vehicles that we have. So all the design and development of launch vehicles, PSLVs, GSLVs, SSLVs, everything, all this is happening at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Every experiment with regard to any launch vehicle will also happen at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. So that's why Vikram Sarabhai Space Center looks after everything related to the launch vehicles. Then we have LPSC. LPSC stands for Liquid Propulsion Systems Center, and that's why this is the unit that is responsible sorry, for fuel fabrication. So this is something that helps in fuel fabrication, and this is the unit where all the fuel, especially liquid and the cryogenic fuel, will be developed at LPSC. Then we have SDSC, that stands for Satish Dhawan Space Center. Now, this Satish Dhawan Space Center basically is where we launch our satellites from. So, this is the launch base infrastructure for ISRO. This is the launch base infrastructure. And then we have URSC. URSC stands for UR Rao Satellite Center. Now, UR Rao Satellite Center is where we develop all the satellites. So, satellite development takes place at URSC. Initially, it was called as ISAC, ISRO Satellite Center, but then the name has been changed to URSC. So, at some places, you will still see that ISAC is written. So, this ISAC stands for ISRO Satellite Center, now which has been renamed to UR Rao Satellite Center. Then we have SAC. SAC stands for Space Applications Center. And this is where we see that a lot of components, sensors, etc., all the research and development for the future, all these things will be done at Space Applications Center. So you can say that the various components and sensors, etc., they are developed of a satellite. They are developed at Space Applications Center, and a lot of research and development will be done at Space Applications Center. And then after that we have NRSC. NRSC stands for National Remote Sensing Center. So National Remote Sensing Center basically is the unit where we receive all the remote sensing data, and the processing of remote sensing data is done at this center. So this is where we do the processing of remote sensing data received from our satellites. So processing of remote sensing data that we receive from our satellites will be done at NRSC. And then when it comes to the last one, that is HSFC, which has lately has been in the news constantly. This stands for Human Space Flight Center. And Human Space Flight Center basically looks after, it is going to look after the operations of any human flights. So operations and management of human space flights. And right now, that's why it has been in the news, because of the Gaganyaan mission. Because of the Gaganyaan mission, because HSFC is very, very important with regards to the Gaganyaan mission. So that's why HSFC has been very, very important and has been in the news constantly. So that's why just remember about it, because it has been constantly in the news. Now, apart from all these units, these two units also become important: Antrix and NSIL. Now, Antrix and NSIL, they both are called as commercial arms of ISRO. They are called as commercial arms of ISRO. Now, why we call them as commercial arms is because everything with regards to everything with regard to whatever ISRO has to do, or every marketing or any revenue generation thing that ISRO is related to, all this will be taken care of these two. So whether, let's say, we are launching a satellite for somebody for which we are earning a lot, or maybe a technology that we are transferring to some country, so for that also we are probably earning something, or an instrument that we have sold to some company, so that also is an earning. So everything that is related to the commercial dealings of ISRO, they are being taken care of by Antrix and NSIL. Now here, Antrix has been here for more than 20 years now. It's been more than 20 years that Antrix has existed, but NSIL is very new. NSIL was introduced in 2019. It was set up in 2019. HSFC also was set up in just 2019. So all these, they have been newer components. All these other components, they have been here for almost more than 20 years. But HSFC just in 2019 it was established, and same NSIL also was established in 2019. Now here questions were also raised that if Antrix is already there, why do you need NSIL? How is NSIL different from whatever Antrix is supposed to do? So some controversy also erupted in this thing also, and this is where the government had given an answer that Antrix and NSIL will have different rules. Antrix, as it was said, that Antrix will be supply based. Antrix will be supply based, and NSIL will be demand based. So this is what ISRO, or rather the government of India, said, that Antrix is going to be supply based and NSIL is going to be demand based. Now, when we say supply based and demand based, what it means is that NSIL will be looking after every new request that is being put by somebody. Suppose that somebody comes to us, or let's say some country or some company comes to ISRO and says that, can you launch this satellite for me? So that new request that has come in, that will be taken care of by NSIL. That's why it is demand based. That any demand being raised by the market will be taken care of by NSIL. And Antrix is supply based, meaning that if we already have something and if that is to be given to somebody, then Antrix will play a role there. It's just like, let's say, a grocery shop, that when you go to a grocery shop, you can only buy something that the grocery shop has. So that is the role of Antrix, that Antrix will act like a grocery shop, that everything that ISRO has and somebody says that I need this, then that will be taken care of by Antrix. But if a new request comes in, then in that case, NSIL is the one that has to be approached. So this is how the government had clarified that Antrix and NSIL, they are going to have different roles. So this was official. Unofficially, it is said that there is another reason why NSIL has been set up. That Antrix as a company hasn't been doing very well. It's a fully owned government of India company, and Antrix hasn't been doing very well. There are certain controversies in which also it has landed. There are certain cases that are also pending against Antrix. So there are a lot of issues that Antrix has run into, and the government wanted that, okay, let them fight their issues, and let us have NSIL, and NSIL will take care of all our commercial needs. But this is unofficial. You cannot write this in the examination. In the examination, if at all a question comes about Antrix or NSIL, this is what you have to write, that Antrix is supply based and NSIL is demand based. All the other stories and all the conjectures, you can't write that in the exam. Now, lastly, apart from all these, we have InSpace. So, InSpace stands for Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. Now, this also was established just in 2020. This also is a new part of this organizational chart. Now, InSpace basically is where we are trying to help the private entities. This is going to support and authorize the non-governmental private entities. So this is exactly what it will do, that it will help the private sector. It will help the private companies grow, and every need that they have with ISRO, if they want to get some help from ISRO, this is where InSpace will be the organization or the unit that will help in corresponding between ISRO and the private entities. So that's why in this manner we see that InSpace also is going to play a very, very important role in the development of this entire space sector in India, and help the private companies and the startups grow in the in the space sector in India. Now, so that's why there are all these centers, so that we discussed of. Most of these centers are in Bengaluru, and we see that since the setup of space technology happened, it always was Bengaluru where all these things happened. So that's why the head office is in Bengaluru. The ISRO Satellite Center is here. LPSC is here. All these important units, they are all placed in Bengaluru. Apart from that, in Thiruvananthapuram, you have Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Largely, it is there. Then Sriharikota is where you have the launch-based infrastructure. Hyderabad is where you have NRSC, and Space Application Center is in Ahmedabad. So, Space Application Center, you can say, is the only important part of all those units that we discussed, which is not in the southern part of the country, which is in Gujarat. Now, also why a lot of infrastructure and everything has been built in the south is also because of the fact that the launches need to happen from here. The launches are supposed to happen from Sriharikota, and that's why it would not make any sense to have your launch vehicles being developed in Delhi or let's say somewhere in the north, and then you carry it from there to here. It will be a nightmare, an operational and logistics nightmare if that happens. So that's why in most of the cases we see that all these important centers, they are here in the southern part of the country. Now, in this particular regard, there is something that is important, that when we talk about these launches, there are two launch sports that we now have. First, obviously, the one that we have here in Sriharikota. This is where Sriharikota is located. And right now, all our launches are happening in Sriharikota. But of late, you'll see that there is another news with regards to the second launch based infrastructure that India is building, and this is at Kulasekarapatnam. Now, this Kulasekarapatnam is in Tamil Nadu. Now, why are we building a second infrastructure or second launch base is also something that you should understand. What you'll see is that most of the launches that are done, right? most of the launches that we do, all these launches, first you'll see that the launches are done eastward. All right, the launches are done eastward, and the launches are largely done from near the equator. So launches are done eastward. I'll use Let me use a blank slide for this. So two things. One, we see that the launches are done eastward. Launches done eastward. Now the question is why. And second thing is that the launches that we do, the launches are done near the equator. Now the question is why. Why are we doing eastward launches only, and why are we doing it near the equator? Now, to answer this, the answer to the first question is that we know that the Earth rotates, and you might know that the Earth rotates from west to east. Now, when the Earth rotates from west to east, if we launch eastward, then we are able to gain more speed. We'll be able to use the speed of the rotation of the Earth, and this relative speed will help us in launching the satellite easier. It makes the launches easier as compared to if the launches were being done westward. So that's why you'll see that the launches are always done eastward. The launches are not done westward, and that is why the launches will be done largely from the eastern coast. Because if the launches are done from the west coast, it means that these satellites, for example, let's say if the satellite launches were being done from here, somewhere here in Karnataka, or maybe in Kerala, or maybe in Goa or Maharashtra, then in that case what happens, that as you launch, you will be flying over the Indian subcontinent, you'll be launching over India, and that can be unsafe. What if something fails? What if some mishap happens? Then it can lead to a lot of uh, problems. And that's why the launches, whenever they are done, because the launches have to be done eastward, that's why we prefer an eastern coast. So that's why you should remember that why satellite launches are done eastward and near the equator. So first, why eastward? Because of the fact that use we want to use the rotation of the earth, because rotation of the earth will help in this particular launch. So so that's why, just remember this, that launches are done eastward. Why they are done eastward? Because typically when you do eastward launch, to take advantage of the earth's rotation, which is west to east. All right, so that's why it adds to the rotational speed, and that's why to the speed of the rocket, and that's why it makes it more efficient altogether. It needs less fuel altogether to reach the necessary speed in the required orbit. So that's why we see that strategically in most of the cases, we'll see that all the space ports will be either on an island, or they are in the east coast. Right, so this, what it does is that this adds rotational speed of the earth, speed of the earth it adds rotational speed of the earth to the speed of the rocket. So that's why it needs less fuel. So that's why it needs less fuel for the launch. Correct. So that's why the launches are done eastward. Now the second question is that why the launches are done, normally the launches are done near the equator. So why the launches are done near the equator. Now also understand why exactly this is done. Because once you are near the equator, and you might have, I don't know whether you've read about this in geography, that when it comes to doing the launch from near the equator, the first and foremost, the rotational speed of the earth near the equator is the maximum. At the poles, the rotational speed are the minimum, and at the equator, the rotational speeds are the maximum. And that's why you are able to gain the maximum speed out of this. And that's why we normally do it near the equator. And also, our access to especially the access to the geosynchronous orbits are better from the equator. And that's why if you do a launch closer to the equator, you'll have an advantage where you have a direct access to the geosynchronous orbit or the geostationary orbit. And that's why we see that it becomes very, very crucial. So that's why launches are done near the equator, because first we aim to gain maximum rotational speed as the earth's rotational speed is the maximum at the equator. And second, makes it easier to get to the geosynchronous or geostationary orbits. So that is why we will prefer that it is done near the equator. Now comes the question that why did we have to have another launch port? Why new spaceport? Because when it comes to the launches, let's say we have to do the launch towards the equator. Now going towards the equator also would mean that we'll be passing very close to Sri Lanka. Correct? If the launches are done here like this, it will be very close to Sri Lanka. So that's why the launches that we do are being done like this to avoid Sri Lanka. So now you are increasing the path length. The total path length is higher. But when you do the launch from here, you automatically are avoiding Sri Lanka, because it's not only that Indian lives matter, Sri Lankan lives also matter. So you cannot simply launch a satellite over Sri Lanka. So that's why we would have to take a bigger path from here on. So that's why this new spaceport is under development, where we want to avoid Sri Lanka and still get to the equator very easily. So this will reduce the total time and reduce the total fuel that we are using, and that's why it will become more cost effective and efficient altogether. And that's why this second spaceport is also being developed by India. Now coming to the last topic that we have in this chapter, and this is about space debris. Now, space debris basically is any junk or any piece of machinery that has been left by humans in space. Now, overall, what's happening is that today the number of these objects and these kind of space debris, they have been increasing, and the number of launches are increasing. There are so many private launches, there are so many nano satellites being launched, and all this is increasing the total amount of space junk. And today it has started becoming a big challenge. And if you look at the data and the distribution, what we understand is that 28% of everything that we have right now, they are non-functional objects. These are non-functional objects. Sorry, these are fragments. 65% of non-functional objects, and only 7% is what is operational in the space right now. So only 7% of operational satellites, and rest everything is junk. Rest everything is a waste that we have generated over a period of time. So now this is increasing, and this is creating a problem that is very difficult to handle. That when you look into the data, you look at all these data and you feel that this is going to be a problem. There are 4,000 active satellites, more than 3,000 dead satellites, more than 34,000 pieces of space junk which are larger than 10 centimeters, 128 million pieces of space junk that are larger than 1 millimeter. So that's why the numbers are huge, right? These numbers are huge and they are going to cause a lot of problem in the coming future. So that's why we see that this is becoming a big challenge altogether for the entire space technology. And related to this, there is a concept which is called as Kessler syndrome. Now this Kessler syndrome is a concept that was proposed by NASA scientist Donald Kessler back in 1978. And what he said is that if there was too much of space junk in the orbit, it could result in a chain reaction where more and more objects could collide and create new space junk in the process, to the point where Earth's orbit became unusable. So what is said is that it could be a scenario in the future where some satellites they collide, and by colliding they create a lot of space junk, and this space junk collides with more satellites and that creates more of space junk. So in a manner, a chain reaction will be set up, so much so that this entire orbit might become unusable, and especially in the context of low earth orbit, this becomes a possibility. Today we see that there are a lot of avoidance methods that are being used so that the satellites can avoid any space junk that's there in the low earth orbit. So low earth orbit is feeling that pressure already, and that's why we see that there are a lot of efforts now that we are making in ensuring that we can close these gaps and all these issues that are happening with regard to the space junk. So that's why we are trying to clean up the space debris today, and there are a lot of different methods that are being used in different parts of the world. So for example, some satellites or some missiles are being used so that we can kick the satellite away from uh, from the low earth orbit. We also design the satellites in a manner that once they are defunct, they would fall into the Pacific. They would be designed in a manner that they fall into the Pacific. Similarly, there are other methods that are being used to constantly also count them. So, for example, ISRO has Project Netra. Project Netra. So, this Project Netra basically is about having an understanding of the space debris that India has been creating. So, it is about monitoring space, or rather Indian space debris. Monitoring of the Indian space debris. So this is basically what we are trying currently, and similarly we see that others also have been trying. Japan, for example, JAXA, that is Japanese Space Agency, they've come out with a fishing net kind of an approach where they'll be collecting all the space debris, and this is what they are also doing. So there are multiple different things, there are multiple approaches that are being used altogether by different countries in ensuring that we can clear the space debris that are being created currently. And that's why when you look at the number of these space debris, especially these top three countries, they have created a lot of space debris, and that's why the biggest number of approaches also that are being used are by these countries in trying to avoid a mishap like Kessler syndrome that we spoke of, that we discussed, right? So let's take a break here. We'll discuss about the questions that have come in the mains examination from space technology after the break. So this more or less is the end of the chapter. But yes, a lot of current affairs is also there. We discuss some of the news related to the current affairs, but this is one chapter where maximum number of current affairs related articles will be there. So that also has to be complemented along with whatever we discussed. So time is 6:55. So let's be back by 7:10. Let's take a 15-minute break. Let's be back by 7:10. First, I'll discuss with you all the previous year questions, and then we'll move on to our next chapter, that is biotechnology. Welcome back, everyone. Now, also, if you have any questions, if there are questions which are unanswered, please let me know. In this slide, China is mentioned twice. Okay, you are talking about Brazil because Brazil gets help from China in its, and largely China is launching for Brazil. That's why. Remembering all ISRO center names is essential. The ones that we discussed, they are the ones which are very very crucial in the entire setup, and that's why we discuss them. All the others that we did not discuss, they are not important. Can we launch over Sri Lanka? They are not our It doesn't matter if they are not our people. It matters that they are people. So that's why we cannot launch over Sri Lanka, and that is why we have been building this new port. Does IS maintain ISRO? If yes, how? Directly, they'll not be involved, because it, if it happens, it will only be not IS, but civil servants will be there who will be involved in the working of the Ministry of Science and Technology, and that is where they'll be involved with ISRO. Hmm. So let's look at some of the questions that have come in the mains examination from this chapter. First question, if you see, launched on 25th December 2021, James Webb Space Telescope has been much in the news since then. What are its unique features that make it superior to its predecessor space telescopes? What are the key goals of this mission? What are the potential benefits that it holds for human race? So unique features, the goals that it has, and the benefits that it has, right? So there are three parts to answering this question. Now, first, we'll obviously discuss about this is James Webb Space Telescope, and this has been launched, this and that. So, a basic idea will be given first as an introduction. Then comes the unique features and what sets it apart from the predecessor space telescopes. Now, when we say predecessor, meaning the space telescopes that existed before it. So, which are the predecessors? One is the Hubble Space Telescope, most important space telescope that we have until now, Hubble Space Telescope, plus also the Spitzer Space Telescope. These two can be considered as its predecessors, mainly because Hubble Space Telescope has been one of the most important telescopes that world has had, and at the same time, Spitzer is very very important because it was an infrared telescope, and this James Webb also is an infrared telescope. Now, compared to them, how is it unique? First unique feature is the fact that it is at L2. The other, for example, Hubble Space Telescope, it was in the low Earth orbit. So now it being in the L2, it will be able to get better observations. So L2 is very, very important. Infrared is very, very important because infrared are longer wavelengths compared to the optical ones, and that's why they'll be able to get, uh, they will be able to travel longer distances, and they'll be able to give you observations of whatever we haven't been able to see until now. So that also makes it very unique. So similarly, there are other features like shielding and how they'll be able to last longer with better observations. Then the goals of the mission largely are with regards to the understanding of the early universe, that how it wants to understand the early universe, plus also observe the things that we haven't been able to observe yet. Because infrared is being used, we'll be able to see some things that we perhaps wouldn't have been able to see with the optical telescope that was Hubble. So there are these goals, and we are trying to understand the origin of the universe, what happened during the early universe, and maybe get some sense of what theories we have currently, what Big Bang theory and some of the other theories say. The benefits, it will give us a better understanding overall. Technologically, this is one of the most superior telescopes that we have built, and that's why all these technologies will also help us in the future, also in understanding of the universe and also understanding of the earth. understanding of the origin of the solar system and the earth, etc., we will be having a much better clarity. And maybe also the unknowns of the universe can be known with the help of this space telescope. So there are all these benefits that we might be able to draw out of this space telescope. So this was more or less, you can say, a current affairs based question that they had asked, because 2021 this was launched and 2022 this question came. What is India's plan to have its own space station and how will it benefit our space program? Very recently also this was in news that India, or when uh, Prime Minister Modi, when he went to take an idea about what's happening with Gaganyaan mission and where we are with regards to Gaganyaan mission, this is where these things were also discussed, that by 2035 let's have our own space station, right? So before that, in 2018 also it was in the news where ISRO had said that by 2030 India will have its own space station, because there is speculations that would India, or is India going to join the International Space Station. So then it was clarified that no, we are not going to join the International Space Station, but rather we are going to work on our own space station, and we'll start working on it after the launch of Gaganyaan mission. This is what was said, that after the launch of Gaganyaan mission, we'll start working on our own space station. So now we started. So this is again something that has been reiterated when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he went to take a cognizance of the Gaganyaan mission and where we are with regards to it. Now, overall, when it comes to this, what will be the what? So what is the benefit? Benefit wise, there are multiple things that we can think of. One is that once you have your presence in the space, you can also provide a kind of control to all the other uh, space missions that we have launched, especially in the low Earth orbit. We can also control all the satellites that we have in the low Earth orbit. Plus, it can also help us in conducting space related experiments. For example, experiments on the space environment, experiment on how the human body responds to this space environment, also conducting some microgravity experiments. So, there are all these things that we can do, and these are the benefits that we can think of when it comes to our own space station. Then the next question: why is Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System, or IRNSS, what why is it needed? How does it help in navigation? So very simple, again something that we discussed, that overall we want to be more secured, and this is something that will help us in building indigenous technologies and helps us take better cognizance of our internal and external security. And at the same time, it will be able to this is going to be a technology which we are developing according to Indian technological needs. What we need, we are building accordingly. Whatever we want to do, we are doing things accordingly. So that's why it is going to help us in better management of the navigation. And how does it help in navigation? You can talk about how triangulation works and how it is going to work, plus about the restricted service and the stranded positioning service, and all these things can be mentioned in this question. Then the next question is: India has achieved remarkable successes in unmanned space missions, including Chandrayaan and Mars orbiter mission, but has not ventured into manned space missions, both in terms of technology and logistics. Explain critically. Now, in this question, we are basically discussing why haven't been there, why haven't we got there yet. So now we know that now Gaganyaan mission is in the cusp of launch, and that's why it will be launched very soon. But at the same time, we haven't taken any manned mission yet. This is the first human space flight that India is taking. So why have we waited so long? Technologically, first thing, it's very difficult to launch it. There are a lot of parameters that you have to take into account, keep in check, so that you can launch a human space mission. At the same time, we understand that making this mission possible also cost wise is a big challenge, and that's why logistically it is going to pose a big problem, because it is going to take a lot of effort for us, and a lot of money is required, is involved in making such a mission successful. Also, there are security challenges that we have to ensure that anyone who is going as a part of this mission has to come back safely. So there are those things also that have to be taken into account. So there are a lot of these challenges that we have to overcome those challenges is the biggest problem. And that's why we did not keep it as a priority until now, because there were a lot of things that we were working on with regard to our space mission. So space technology, so whether in terms of agriculture or other things, resource management and all that, whether communication and navigation, etc. So given all those requirements that we had, we did not think that Gaganyaan mission, something like a human space flight mission, will be a priority. Now that we are pretty stable in our space missions and in our space program, now we feel that okay, fine, this is the time where we can go further and we can start building on these things. So that's why these are the challenges that we had until now. And then the next question, if you see, discuss India's achievements in the field of space science and technology. How the application of economic development. Now, first is about India's achievements. Now, in case of India's achievements, there are two ways in which a question, answer can be written here. Either you can write an answer chronologically. So, either chronologically you can write this answer, or you can write this answer sector wise. So either you can write that okay, in 1960s we have done this, 1970s we have done this, 1980s we have done this and all that. So that's one way to write this answer. The second can be that you write sector wise, that in space, let's say in communication we have done all that, in agriculture this is how it has helped, in navigation this is how it has helped, then in resource monitoring this is how it has helped, in defense this is how it has helped. So you can write sector wise. So either you can write chronologically or you can write sector wise. Choice is yours, and both are correct approaches to use. How it has helped in India's socio-economic development. So here you can write about various things. For example, let's say today in agriculture, space technology helps that you get a better understanding of weather. Based on that, agricultural planning can be done. At the same time, all the predictions are made in advance, and all the systematic arrangements are done according to that. Similarly, we see that in disaster management it has helped in better mitigation of all these strategies. So that's why it also has helped in saving a lot of people from all those damages that can happen because of any given disaster. Then at the same time we see that a lot of opportunities are growing in various different sectors, a lot of employment opportunities are rising in various different sectors, and that is all because of space technology. So that's why we see that there are a lot of things that are there with regards to the socio-economic development that we have seen in India with regard to the space technology. And then last question, if you see, what do you mean by standard positioning system and precision positioning system in the GPS era? Discuss the advantages India perceives from its ambitious IRNSS program employing just 7 satellites. So again, it's the same question, same answer what we discussed. We'll talk about IRNSS, we'll talk about all the advantages. And these two we had discussed, that there is standard positioning service and there is restricted service. So this restricted service is also called as precision positioning system. So you basically have to write about these two areas and why they are important. Standard positioning service will be given to everyone, and it will just be like how you use Google Maps, etc. today. And restricted service will be provided only to the people who are authorized to go into certain areas. So that access will not be given to everyone, will be only given to the people who are authorized to visit those areas. For example, any sensitive area, any area which is defense related, any area where our missiles reside, or even space technology related areas. So all these things can be blocked, and that's also an advantage that we have of IRNSS. So that's why these are the things that you can write in an answer like this. So that's why you'll see that almost every year one question does come from space technology. Almost every year, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, only 20 and 21, because of COVID years we saw that COVID related questions and other questions have been asked. But apart from that, you'll see that every year one question has come from space technology. Even in 2023, we'll discuss 2023 prelims and mains paper later towards the end of our lectures. But even in 2023, one question has been asked. So every year one question in mains examination from space technology is being asked, and that is what you should expect in the coming years as well. Now then, coming to the next chapter, and this next chapter is biotechnology. Now, biotechnology as a chapter, and understand from prelims and mains perspective again. And again, I would say that this is a chapter which is very, very important from both the perspectives of prelims and mains examination. Almost every year in prelims and almost every second year in mains, one question comes from biotechnology. Now, the kinds of questions that they ask in the mains examination, questions have been straightforward, very easy, directly taken from whatever we are going to learn anyway in this chapter. In the prelims examination, however, the kinds of questions are a bit different. There are some questions which will be conceptual in nature. They'll ask from the basics of biotechnology. But then there are certain questions which are simply based on certain terminologies, based on certain terms that are in the news. And they simply pick that term and ask the meaning of that term. If that was a term in the news in one way or the other, they simply pick it from the news articles and they just ask you the meaning. They don't go into the technical details of that term, only the definition of that term. And that's why in this chapter, all these terms are very, very important. In this entire chapter, I'll also talk about a lot of terms. You'll come across a lot of new terms. Plus, in current affairs, you might have come across certain terms. What I want you to know is that in one line, if you just know in one line about what these terms are, and you understand the meaning of that term in just one line, that's more than enough for you in the prelims examination. If at all a word based question comes, you'll find that the word based questions are direct, they're straightforward. But the problem is that if you've not heard of that word, it becomes very difficult for you to answer a question based on that word. So that's why if you come across these words related to biotechnology, just in one line, just know the meaning of that word. So coming to biotechnology, now when it comes to this chapter, we have two words. I can divide it into two words: bio and technology. Bio coming from a word that is bios. All right, bio comes from a word that is bios. So bios, meaning biology, or in a manner you can say meaning living or living things or living organisms, means bios. So that's why biology is the study of the living. So bios, this term basically means that we are talking about the living organisms. And what is technology? We are talking about this subject that is science and technology. Can you tell me what is technology? So a lot of answers, but I'm looking for the correct answer. So innovation, partially okay, fine. Modern science, partially correct. Use of science practically. Prem, you have given the correct answer. Ankush, you have given correct answer in a manner. It makes our life easy in any field. That's correct. Karthik Raj, you have given the correct answer. Implementation of science. Somo, you have given correct answer. Application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes. So just understand this, that when we say technology, the meaning of technology is, in very simple ways, I can say it's nothing but application of science. Technology is application of science. That's it. That so how do you use technology? Technology is based on certain scientific concept, right? So any scientific concept that we learned in physics or chemistry or biology, that gets applied in real life, and as it gets applied in real life, that becomes technology. Whether we discussed about energy or we discuss about space technology. In all these cases, the technology that we are discussing, that if a rocket is being launched, there is a science behind that, correct? The science, there is physics behind that. Why you are able to use certain fuels, because there is science behind that, of how that fuel acts, or how that fuel is even composed of from certain chemicals, because you understand that chemical, you understand the properties of that chemical, and then you are mixing those chemicals to make your fuel. So that's why in a manner you are applying science. So where you apply science for anything, you call it as technology. So that's why technology is nothing but application of science. So that's why in this manner, when we talk about biotechnology, it means that we are talking about application of the living organisms, using living organisms and their processes for the best use of these living organisms for any application. So when you use any living organism or any process in these living organisms for any application, we'll call it as biotechnology. So this is how we can define biotechnology: application of living organisms and their biological processes in order to make the best use of living organisms for the benefit of mankind. So that's why it's nothing but application of living organisms, using living organisms in one way or the other. Now, when it comes to biotechnology and the examples of biotechnology, today biotechnology has grown a lot, but there are very simple examples from your daily life where biotechnology is being used. A very simple example is making curd from milk. So, making curd from milk, what do? You take a bowl of milk, you just add 1 spoon of curd in it, leave it overnight, and next morning you'll see that milk would have converted into curd. How does this happen magically? It doesn't happen magically, it happens because of a bacteria, the action of a certain bacteria called as lactobacillus. And this lactobacillus is as it is in milk, as it goes in milk as a part of that curd that you have mixed in milk, it finds a medium in milk where it can start multiplying, and it starts multiplying and converts milk into curd in this process. So this bacteria, we are using this bacteria for certain application. So that's why making of milk into curd is an example of nothing but biotechnology. Similarly, preservatives that we have used for so many years, for hundreds of years, if not thousands. So many natural preservatives have been used. So all these use of even natural preservatives will be called as biotechnology, because you're using something that was a living organism for some kind of application. Similarly, the process of fermentation, making alcohol is also biotechnology, because there also a lot of cases living organisms or bacteria etc are used in making of alcohol from many of these natural resources. And if you know this, if you go back in history, you'll find that humankind understood how to make alcohol before it understood how to make curd. So the priorities were straight, that first they all learned about how to make alcohol, and later they found that okay, curd can also be made from it. So so they had their priorities very straight. So all this basically is an example of nothing but biotechnology. Even making bread, where we make the use of yeast to make that bread, so that also is an example of biotechnology, where we have been using these processes for hundreds of years easily. But when we talk about biotechnology today, modern biotechnology, this modern biotechnology is very different. It's very different from all these examples that we are taking, because all these examples are more of hit and trial examples, where we probably stumbled upon something, that we did something, it worked, it had a benefit of us, we started using it from there on. So many of these are hit and trials, where it just happened by chance. But modern biotechnology is very different. And modern biotechnology that develops, it develops only since 1950s. Because in 1950s, we understood what is DNA. And once we understood DNA, we understood that this becomes a whole new branch for us. And that is where you'll see that biotechnology as a branch starts to develop, which until now did not exist. But now we see that biotechnology as a branch starts to develop since 1950s. So when it comes to the basic understanding of biotechnology, before we go on to understand the applications in agriculture, in medicine, and all that, the basics are these: understanding of what is DNA, what is gene, or what is a chromosome. We'll try to understand that first, and then move on to understanding of what is biotechnology. Now, when it comes to these terms, understand the basic structure of the living world. If we talk about living organism, any living organism, you might know that these organisms, they make populations. In ecology, you might have heard of this, or you will learn if you have not. They make populations. These populations, the populations of various organisms together, they make various communities, right? And this leads to making an ecosystem. This leads to making an ecosystem where they all will be living together. So overall, they make a biome altogether. They make a biome by just living together. So this is what happens outside an organism and how these organisms. So there will be, let's say, populations. When we say, so population is organisms of similar species. Let's say population of lion or population of tiger is what how we'll count. Then communities where you have different populations together, populations of lions and deers living together in a forest. So that's community. And then ecosystem, where you include all the plants and animals, etc., everything that is living in a certain part. So in this manner, you have this organization. So in a manner, we say that these are this in a manner you can say that this is environmental or ecological, let's say ecological organization. Now, when we enter inside an organism, we see that there is a different world. These organisms, they are made of organ systems. So for example, let's say we have digestive system, respiratory system, muscular system, all these. So these organ systems, they together they function as an organism, and these organ systems will be made of various organs. They are made of various organs. Now, these organs are what? Let's say heart, brain. All these are what? These are organs. So these organs have their own function, correct? They have their own functions, and they are made of set of tissues. They are made of set of tissues. And these tissues basically are nothing but a group of cells which have a particular function. So tissues are group of cells, right? So this, in a manner, we say that the this is the organism structure. Uh, now, now, when it comes to the cells, what we say is that the cells are the smallest structural and functional unit of life. Correct? We call them as smallest structural and functional unit of life. Right? We say that cells are smallest structural and functional unit of life. So smallest structural and functional unit of life. Now, why we say that smallest structural and functional unit of life are cells? Because a cell on its own has everything that it needs to survive as an organism. You might know that there are many organisms which are said to be unicellular organisms. Now, why unicellular organisms? Because they are organisms which are made of only one single cell. That's why they are unicellular, right? They are unicellular. So, amoeba, for example, unicellular, because only one cell performs as an entire organism. So, cell in itself is capable of having all the things that are required for living, because there are certain cell organelles that you have inside, and all these organelles and the entire structure that you have inside the cell, that will lead to this cell having its own life on its own. That's why it is the smallest structural and functional unit of life. Now inside the cells there is another world. So inside the cells you have a very very important part, which is called as the nucleus. There is the nucleus inside the cell, which is also called as the brain of the cell. It is also called as the brain of the cell because it controls and coordinates all the activities in the cell. All the activities in the cell will be controlled and coordinated by nucleus. So that's why nucleus becomes very very crucial part of the cell, and that's why many times it is also referred to as the brain of the cell. Now inside the nucleus there are thread like structures which are called as chromosomes. There are thread like structures inside the nucleus which are called as chromosomes. Now these chromosomes, they are made of certain segments of DNA that are called as genes. So genes will various different genes, they arrange and they make up chromosomes. Genes are basically made of segments of DNA. These genes are made of segments of DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So now this is the structure that you have inside the cell. And now this DNA becomes a very crucial part of this entire system. So chromosomes, so just understand that chromosomes are the biggest, then genes, and then DNA. Because, and that's why there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in our body. In a human body, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, meaning a total of 46 chromosomes. There are almost 20,000 to 25,000 genes, and there are millions of DNA, billions rather, of DNA. So that's why DNA is smallest, that's why it is largest in number, then genes, then after that you have chromosomes. Now what do we mean by all these? Let's try to understand this, because apart from DNA there is also something called as RNA. So what is RNA, we'll understand that as well. Chromosomes. So chromosomes, they are long coiled up thread like structures which are made of DNA and protein. So they basically are segments of DNA which will make up the genes, and hence they are made of these DNA. Now overall what happens is that when it comes to the structure, when we look at the human body, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes that we have, and these 23 pairs of chromosomes, they carry all the genetic information about the body, about that individual. And all these, out of these 23 pairs, there are 22 pairs, or 44 you can say in total, which are common, in males and females. And the 23rd pair is what determines their sex, which determines whether they are going to be males or females. So 23rd pair is what is different, and 22 pairs are similar. Now in this particular scenario, so chromosomes, that's why these are long coiled up thread like structures. As you can see here, they're long coiled up thread like structures, and they are made of DNA and protein, and they basically will carry all the genetic information of any given individual. Now inside them we have genes, and these genes are nothing but segments of DNA that contain the instructions for development and function of living organisms, and they become the basic units of heredity, and they are passed on from parents to the offsprings. And that's why there are variations that can happen, and these variants are also called as alleles, which can result in variations in the traits. Now genes, understand genes. And genes, when it comes to the human body, for example, estimated number is between 20,000 to 25,000. So 20 to 25,000 genes in humans. So there are 20 to 25,000 genes that are found inside our body. Now every gene that we have, every gene has a specific function. Every gene has a specific function, and every particular characteristic that somebody has, it is because of some kind of gene or the other. every characteristic, every physical trait that a person possesses, it is because of a certain gene, a gene that you might have inherited from your mother or your father. So those genes, the mixing of those genes have a mix of properties in the offsprings. So for example, color of the eye, color of the hair, color of the skin, height also up to an extent. So all these kind of traits that people have, they will be because of the genes that they inherit. The amount of hair that will be left on the scalp, so that also is genetic in nature. So everything is because of certain genes, that if you are inheriting those genes, then in that case those genes will start showing their effect. And that's why there are many diseases also that happens because of genes, because of either presence or absence of a certain gene can also lead to certain complications or maybe certain diseases. So that's why all these genes, every gene has a specific characteristic. All right, every gene has a particular characteristic, and all the characteristics which are inherited from the mother and the father, so all these will lead to the genes being present. So all these genes, that's why just understand that genes become crucial. And can you just give me 2 minutes? I'll just fill my bottle and come. I feel thirsty. Hmm. Yeah. So genes, so that's why just remember that genes become very crucial because they are related to all the properties that somebody possesses. Now these genes, they are made of segments of DNA. Now DNA becomes the most important part of this entire system, because each and every DNA has a certain requirement, and these DNA, they become the very basic units of information. They are like the very basic units of information, and they are the ones which are building up to the presence of all these genes in the body. So they are the molecules that carry the genetic instructions which are used in the growth, development, functioning and reproduction of all living organisms. Now when you look at this DNA structure, what you'll find is that they are made of chemical bases or base pairs. So base means that it's not base like the base of a building, it's base of acid and base. So these are basic in nature, so that's why they are called as chemical bases. There are four that you have adenine, thiamine, guanine and cytosine, and these are the four which make up the DNA. Now in this, adenine always combines with thiamine and guanine always combines with cytosine. And now what happens is that their pairs, they would arrange in various ways so that they can make a gene. There will be segments of these DNA, they will arrange in certain manner, and uh, when they combine in a certain manner, when they combine in a logical sequence, they make up a gene. So either let's say it can be something like this, that AT and GC may combine, or TA and GC may combine, or TA and CG may combine, or AT and CG may combine. And then after these combinations, they will keep on forming a pair, and that pairs that they are forming in this manner, a logical sequence will make a gene, and that gene will have a certain characteristic. Then sets of genes will then form the chromosomes, and then ultimately the set of all the chromosomes that we have in a certain body will be called as genome. there is another concept called as genome. We'll discuss about that also, just wait. So overall, DNA becomes very very crucial here, because DNA will carry all the basic units of information. So if I give you an analogy, a simple analogy is of a book. That if you think of a book, DNA, you can say, are like words. All right, DNA is like words, and these words, they make up sentences or they make up paragraphs. So DNA is like words. Now, out of all the sentences or paragraphs that you have, sentences or paragraphs that we have, they basically are like the genes. So what happens? The words, when they are in a logical sequence, they will form a sentence or they would form a paragraph which makes some sense. And that is what happens in a gene, that when DNA comes in a logical sequence, they form a gene. If they are not in a logical sequence, then it can lead to a genetic disorder. It can lead to a genetic disease or any kind of disease for that matter. It will happen because something wrong happened with the gene. So that's why, if let's say the words are not arranged properly, if there are mistakes, then the meaning of the sentence or the meaning of the paragraph may not be clear. So something similar happens if the DNA are not arranged in a proper manner. Then in that case, it might lead to some genetic disposition. So words, sentences, I mean sentences or paragraphs are like genes. And then when you make an entire chapter out of it, when you make entire chapter out of it, these chapters are like chromosomes. Right, these chapters that you have, so there are 23 chapters, you can say 23 pairs of chromosomes. So in the body there are 23 chapters like that. And this entire book that you have, this entire book that you have, which contains every cell in the body, every cell in the body, including all the chromosomes from all the cells in the body, they basically will form the genome. They form the genome. And that's why very you can see frequently there is something called as human genome or human genome project, and all these kind of things are there in the news. So when we say genome, this is the meaning of genome. That genome basically is where we are talking about everything included. All these things, they are a part of the genome. So they would make up the genome altogether. So uh, so basically, when we are talking about genome, we are basically talking about the complete set of DNA that we have in any organism, including all of its genes. And that's why genome will contain all the information that are needed to build this particular organism and to also allow it to grow and develop. So that's why genome becomes very, very crucial in this particular scenario. And so that's why, just remember this, or let me just write it somewhere, that what is genome. So genome, you can say that we are talking about the complete set of DNA in an organism, including all of its genes. All right. The complete set of DNA in an organism, including all of its genes, will be called as genome. So that's why, just understand, we have DNA, we have genes, we have chromosomes, and then we have genome. So now, apart from that, there is one more crucial aspect of this entire system, which is called as RNA, that is ribonucleic acid. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. Now, this ribonucleic acid also becomes a very, very crucial part of the cells that we have, and they play a lot of different roles. And most importantly, their function will be related to uh, translation of the information from DNA to and the into the proteins. So that's why they become very crucial. And there are several types of RNA that we have, and uh, they become very, very crucial part of the entire biology. So understand the basic difference of what is DNA versus what is RNA, because both of them, they are very similar molecules in their structure. So what exactly they mean and how exactly they are different, we need to understand that. So now, in case of DNA and RNA, the first difference is, most important difference is the difference in their structure. Now if you look at the DNA structure, if you look at the DNA structure, what we see is that in a manner you can say that the structure is like a twisted ladder, right? If you have a ladder and you twist that ladder, this is the kind of structure that you'll get, the kind of shape that you'll get. So overall, basically, this is basically what happens, and this kind of structure is called as a double helical structure. All right, it has a double helical structure. And when it comes to RNA has a single helical structure. All right, it is, so that's why DNA is double stranded molecule and it is single stranded molecule. That's why this basically is your RNA, and this right here that you have is DNA. All right, this is what DNA is like. So that's why the difference between DNA and RNA is like that. So in structure you have this difference, and in case of the function also, we see that there are differences. Now how in function they are different? So if you look at the function of DNA, what we understand about DNA is that DNA will be required for the genetic information that the body has, and when it comes to the transmission of the genetic code that is required for the protein production, that is done by RNA. So RNA basically what it does is that it reads all the instructions from the DNA, and DNA, you can say that DNA is like a master blueprint. All right, it is like the master blueprint, and RNA will read all the instructions which are there in the DNA, and then after that it will make, in helping it, they will help in making proteins which are based on those instructions. So based on those instructions that it has gathered from the DNA, it will make proteins accordingly, and these proteins will become the basic building blocks for the body. That they will become the they will be the ones which will help in making everything, doing everything, and all these things. So that's why they become very very crucial, and that's why RNA becomes very very important, because all the instructions that are DNA, that are there in the DNA, uh, they would not transform into something if RNA was not there. Because let's say it's like a book. Suppose that I have written a book in English and you do not know how to read English. All right, you have no idea about English. It's a completely foreign language for you, as it should have been. But let's say it is written in English and it's a completely foreign language. You don't know it, but I know how to read English. All right. So the book that is written, which is basically the set of all the DNA, I am RNA, and I will read it and I'll explain it to you that okay, this is what is written. So if there was no RNA, then what's written in the instructions nobody would know. So that's why RNA becomes very very crucial in understanding of what's written in that blueprint, what's written in the DNA. RNA will tell you, or RNA will, that's why, help in making proteins based on all those instructions that are there in that manual, which are there in that blueprint. So that's why they become very very crucial in this entire context of uh, our structure of the body. So overall, when it comes to the basics of biotechnology, these are the things that I would say that these are the basics of biotechnology. So that's why just think that, understand that, because what happens is many times we keep using all these terms, DNA and genes and chromosomes, etc., interchangeably. So just understand that they are different, that DNA is the basic building block, genes are segments of DNA, and chromosomes basically are the house of genes, and all the DNA and all the chromosomes of the entire body together will make up the genome. So that's why just remember all these things and understand the basic differences between all of them. So anything, any doubt from whatever we have discussed until now? Anything that you want to ask? Can we call 23rd pair of genes as sex-linked chromosome? Yes, they are called as sex chromosomes because they are the ones that determines whether somebody will be a male or a female. What is allele frequency? So allele frequency, basically, in a manner, you can say that uh, it's how many times a particular gene appears in a particular organism. So, or in a particular, let's say, population. In ecological terms, we talk about it. So there we see that we let's say, for example, the gene which is responsible for color of the eye. So how many times in a certain population of human beings, how many times does this color appear, this particular gene appear? This is called as allele frequency. So that is something, but especially in more than biological studies, in ecological studies also, they become very, very crucial. Genes are segments of DNA, or DNA is a segment of gene? So genes are made of segments of DNA. Segments of DNA together will make up a particular gene. So there will be certain number of DNA together in a particular gene. what what's electrophoresis? So electrophoresis basically is a technique which you use to separate different DNA and RNA molecules. So this is where we see that all the DNA, RNA, etc., all the proteins, they will all be separated based on their sizes and actually charge also. So based on their size and based on their charge, they will be separated out, and that process is called as electrophoresis. Please explain again little about RNA. So RNA, just understand that RNA helps in making of the proteins in the body. So that's why they will be found all across the cell. All across the cell they will be found because they will help in making proteins, which are the building blocks of any organism's body. Now, what they make, how they make, it's all based on the information and the instructions that they read in the DNA. So DNA is like the cookbook, it's like the instruction carrier. So it has all the instructions written, and RNA is the one that reads those instructions, and based on that it makes those proteins. So every cell in the body and every part of the body that you have, it is made on the basis of how RNA has interpreted what it should make. DNA is the smallest unit, yes, you can say that. In the meme, that's wrong, that genes are segments of DNA, actually is reverse. Genes are segment. No, this is fine. Genes are segments of DNA. Segments of DNA, they make up the gene. So that's why so I'll tell you. I understand where you are getting confused. Just understand this: that you have all these genes. Now, when we take a particular segment, this segment basically will become a gene. So that's why we say that genes are segments of DNA. Could you elaborate 23 gene pairs? Not 23 gene pairs, 23 pairs of chromosomes. Genes are way larger in number. Genes are almost 20,000 to 25,000. Some of the data are saying that approximately 21,000 it should be, but largely it is said that it should be between 20 to 25,000. There is a saying that there are 7% similar in the world, or doppelgangers. Is it because of adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine in the DNA? Uh, see, it's not exactly correct that there are 7 persons who are similar. It's just said, it is something that is said, the number can be higher or lower. So, but if at all it happens, it will only happen when the DNA is very, very similar. Now, also understand something very interesting. You might have heard of these things, like that we share 99% of the genes with chimpanzees. 99.9% of the genes or DNA with the chimpanzees are similar to what we have. You might have heard of it. If I ask you, do you know how much similarity in genetic structure a human being and a banana has? The banana, the fruit that you eat. Do you know how much similarity do we have? Should be very, very different, correct? Percentage wise, do you have any idea? It's almost 65%, 65, 66%. So we share more than 60% of the genes we share with banana also. So that's why there are a lot of similarities, because see, a lot of life functions, you living, you breathing, respiration, how you take nutrition, how you live, all these things are going to be common across a lot of species. So obviously a lot of species will have very similar genes, but then after that there are certain changes that will start coming in between a plant kingdom and animal kingdom, and within the animal kingdom the various different uh, families and classes, etc., that we have. So based on that we see that there are all these things. And that's why, where if at all, let's say by chance, if it so happens that the DNA sequences are very, very, very similar, then you will have those doppelgangers. So I think I've cleared the questions. Do we have any guideline regarding biotech? We do have. We'll discuss towards the later part of the discussion. All right. So is there any possibility of exact DNA in twins? We haven't found that. Even in twins who are of same gender, identical twins of same gender, even there we have seen that there are slight differences in their DNA structure. Hmm. So let's move to the next topic. And this is where we are talking about the branches of biotechnology. Now, in branches of biotechnology, what we see is that every biotechnology branch is given a certain color. We color code all the branches. So, green biotechnology is for agriculture, red biotechnology is for medicine or health applications, blue biotechnology is for anything related to water. Similarly, we have white biotechnology, which is related to industries, gray biotechnology related to the environment. We have brown biotechnology related to the management of the arid zones and the desert, basically any water scarce areas. Then we have violet biotechnology, which is not exactly a branch of biotechnology, but everything related to the laws, the acts, the intellectual property rights, and the contracts, and all these things, which are any documents related to biotechnology. They are called as violet biotechnology. So, law, ethical issues, philosophical issues, IPRs, all these will be called as violet biotechnology. And then lastly, there is dark biotechnology, which is nothing but, you can say, all the negative aspects negative aspects of biotechnology. So we basically will be talking about all these branches one by one. We'll try to understand their value, we'll try to understand how exactly and what exactly they are, and based on that we'll move forward. So what we'll do is that we will do the analysis branch by branch. We'll take first branch, and then we'll move to the second, to the third, and so on. And the important branches will be covered like that. So first and the most important branch is the medical application, that is red biotechnology. Red biotechnology. Now this red biotechnology is where we are applying biotechnology in the medical field. Now, when it comes to the medical field and the application of medical science and biotechnology, there are multiple different ways in which in medical science we are using biotechnology. Now, when you look at India, and if you look at the data for India, you'll find that for all the money that we spend on biotechnology, all the budgets allocated to biotechnology, all the money given to various different aspects and various different programs and policies, you'll find that more than 70% of the money that flows to biotechnology, that comes to medical science. Only 30% of the money is going to agriculture or industries or any other application. So that tells you the importance of biotechnology in medical science. because 70% of the money is just going to biopharmaceutics. It's just going to just one part of biotechnology, one small part of biotechnology. So there are multiple different applications, and we'll discuss about all these applications here. So first is gene therapy. So gene therapy is the therapeutic delivery of nucleic acid into the patient's cell as a drug to treat a disease. Now, here what we are trying to do is that we are trying to use genes to treat a particular disease. Now, many of the diseases, they can be genetic in nature. There are certain diseases that are genetic in nature, and there are certain diseases that might develop over time because of presence or absence of a certain gene, or maybe certain modifications that might have happened in the genes, because of which the genes are either not functioning properly. All right, so there are a couple of things that can happen, that there is an unwanted gene present in the body, and that unwanted gene is causing some problem. So if there is an unwanted gene in the in the body, what will we do? We'll take it away, right? We'll try to take it away so that the problem that was being caused by that additional gene doesn't occur anymore. That's one way to do it. Second way to do it could be on the basis of a gene that is absent from the body, that there is an important gene that is not there in the body itself. So what do? We find that gene, insert it into the body. I mean, it's not that simple. That's what we have to do technically or theoretically. This is what we have to do. Or maybe there is a gene that has changed, that has modified in a manner that it is causing certain problems. So then what do? We edit that gene, right? We'll edit that gene, we'll modify that gene so that that gene starts functioning properly, right? So there are all these things that we can do, and all these things will help us in one way or the other so that we can function properly. So that's why this is called as gene therapy. So it can be about addition of a gene, removal of a gene, or maybe modification in a gene. So there are these ways in which gene therapy can be carried out. So either it will be addition of a missing gene, or removal of an unwanted gene, or modification or replacement of a malfunctioning gene. So these are the three ways in which we can carry out gene therapy. So it can be about modification or replacement of a malfunctioning gene as well. So these are the things that will do, and that will help us in taking care of a certain disease. Similarly, there is something called as genetic testing. So genetic testing is a kind of medical test that identifies the changes in chromosomes, genes, or proteins. Now, genetic testing can help us in confirming or ruling out a certain genetic disorder, or not only genetic disorder, anything that may also be a possibility. Today, if you've seen today, you might have seen that there are so many companies which are doing lab tests, right? And blood tests and full body checkups and all these things are being done. And there are many companies that have come in this particular segment as well. And they can do certain analysis. They can tell you about uh, possibilities of diabetes or possibilities of cancer and all these also. How do they do that? They look for certain genes. There are certain genes which act like markers. These act like genetic markers, and these genes, if present in the body, they can also indicate, even if not present, but maybe future onset of a certain disease. That may be a disease that's not present in the body today, might come into the body tomorrow, right? They it might start being there, it might come into the body, or might years from now. So that all can also be detected with genetic testing. So that's why genetic testing becomes very crucial in these aspects, especially in case of genetic disorder. It is very crucial, but even finding other diseases also, genetic testing can help. Then a very important segment is drug administration, where we are talking about a certain branch called as biopharmaceutics. Biopharmaceutics. So biopharmaceutics basically examines the interrelationships of the physical or chemical properties of the drug, dosage form, and the manner of drug administration on the rate and extent of drug absorption. Now, when we say biopharmaceutics, now biopharmaceutics basically where we are talking about that these are uh, products of biotechnology, where you are making a medicine, you are making a medicine from a biological source, or you are also, when you are making the medicine, you are also looking at how it affects a certain biological being. So let's say how, what kind of effect it has on the human body, what kind of effect it has in long term or short term on the human body. So there are all these things that also can be understood with the help of uh, it can be understood with the help of these biopharmaceutics. Now, when it comes to biopharmaceutics, it becomes very, very crucial because it is where we see that biotechnology is being used in understanding of the diseases. All right, in the understanding of the diseases and also finding better mechanisms to fight diseases. All right, finding better mechanisms to fight diseases. So that's why we see that biopharmaceutics becomes very crucial. Now, a part of biopharmaceutics is pharmacokinetics. Now, you have two terms, pharma and kinetics. Pharma means what? Something related to medicines, right? Is pharma. Kinetics, what context do you use kinetics in? Movement, motion, right? So, when we are looking at the motion of a certain drug or a certain medicine in and out of the body, that how fast does it absorb, how fast does it get excreted, how fast does it start showing its effect. So when we are doing the analysis of all these things, it is called as pharmacokinetics. All right, this is called as pharmacokinetics. So that's why it is described that what the body does to a drug refers to the movement of the drug into, through, and out of the body, the time course from its absorption to excretion. This is called as pharmacokinetics. So that's why pharmacokinetics also becomes very, very crucial part of biopharmaceutics, because every disease, has a different time of incubation. It takes different time to onset, right? So some diseases might onset in a couple of hours. Some might take a couple of days. For example, COVID-19, we would take a prediction period. Why 14 days? Because the virus can take up to 14 days to onset in the body. That's why 14 days. That's why this entire incubation, I mean, the isolation period of 14 days. So that's why we have to understand this, that every disease has a different onset rate. Leprosy, for example, can take up to 5 years of time to onset. Uh, uh, Rabies, it can take 2 days of time to 2 weeks of time to 2 years of time to onset. So that's why every disease has a different onset period, and pharmacokinetics needs to ensure that the drug is acting faster, the medicine is acting faster, or the vaccine is acting faster than the rate of that disease. So that's why pharmacokinetics becomes very, very crucial in this context. Similarly, there is pharmacogenomics. So pharmacogenomics, again, two terms. You have pharma and you have genomics. So pharma, again, medicine. Genomics basically is what? The study of genes, study of genetics. So how exactly genetics can have an effect on a certain medicine, or what kind of medicine is suited to what kind of genes. So for example, it's not that every medicine will be effective everywhere in the world. You'll find that there are medicines, for example, which are being used in India. They may not be effective in Africa, may not be effective in Europe, because genetically they are a bit different from us. And there have been cases where you'll see that there have been very crucial drugs which have worked effectively in one part of the world, but they have been ineffective in other part of the world. Why? Because genetically they are different. So that's why this is where pharmacogenomics comes into the picture, where we are talking about a combination of genetics and pharmaceutics. So how a genetic makeup affects an individual's response to drugs is something that will be studied as a part of pharmacogenomics. So that's why there are all these things that become very crucial from the perspective of biotechnology. Now, one more thing that is very, very important is something called as virotherapy. Now, when you look at virotherapy, just understand this, that virotherapy is the use of virus. That's why virotherapy. It is the use of virus It is the use of virus for some kind of medical treatment. Use of some kind of medical treatment. So virus, for example, when we make vaccines, you might know that in many of the vaccines, you have what? You have the same virus, right? In COVID-19 vaccines, for example, we have virus in some of these vaccines. So that is virotherapy. Wherever in vaccines or in making medicines, in antivirals, many a times, we make the use of virus. So that is virotherapy. And then lastly, we have insulin. Now, what is insulin? Insulin is something that is required for our body so that excess sugar can be removed from the body. To remove excess sugar from the body, we need insulin. Now, patients who are diabetic, who are suffering from diabetes, insulin either is not being made in the body or is being made in very less quantity, which is not effective enough for the body to function. So, then that is something that leads to diabetes. So then the patients who are suffering from diabetes, they will be given insulin injections. So that insulin, which is artificially produced, that also is nothing but a part of biochemistry of the body. So it is also a product of biotechnology. So that also can be called as a part of red biotechnology. So all these will be considered as red biotechnology. All these will be considered as part of red biotechnology. Apart from that, there are other things also we'll discuss about in tomorrow's class. We'll discuss about cloning, we'll discuss about stem cells, etc. So all these are nothing but also products of red biotechnology. All right, they'll also be called as red biotechnology. We'll also discuss about DNA fingerprinting. So this can also come under red biotechnology. So we'll discuss about all these concepts also in tomorrow's class. So let's end our class here. We'll start with agricultural applications in tomorrow's class. Any question if you have. Did not understand pharmacokinetics. Pharmacokinetics basically just break down the word pharma and kinetics, meaning medicine. Kinetic means what? Related to motion. So this is where it is related to the motion of the medicine or the vaccine in and out of the body. So when you take a vaccine or when you take a medicine, how fast does it get absorbed in the body? How fast does it start reacting? How fast does it start showing its effect? And how fast does it get excreted of the body? That is pharmacokinetics, when you are looking at the motion of or the journey of this medicine through the body. Set of period means, in what context have you asked this question? Can you tell me this? Why need to classify with regard to colors? I mean, this is just you can say a nomenclature or a standard that they have used. All right, it's just a standard that they have used to make things simpler, just to make the classification simpler. That's it. Wonderful session. Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you so much for the wonderful comments. It makes lives easier for us also when we get these. Can sleep easy at night. Role of virotherapy. Role of virotherapy basically is in, I mean, wherever in medical therapies wherever we make the use of virus. For example, in making a lot of antiviral treatments, we actually make the use of viruses. So that's why it is called as virotherapy. So in vaccines, most importantly, you might have seen that we make the use of virus. We all know that Subhash Chandra Bose, who has been compared to Gumnami Baba of Faizabad, Uttar Pradesh, has been debated a lot. The Indian government did the DNA test of these two people, but they did not want to give the electrophoresis report. So, see, there have been a lot of controversy in this entire context of Gumnami Baba, who looks to be very very similar to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and that's why there have been all these controversies around it and a lot of documents which have been not made public. So that's why we don't know what is the context and why certain things were done or why it was not done, whether there were certain reasons or was it only for political reasons. Very difficult to say. Like rabies, you gave example of 2 hours, 2 days, etc. In that context, it's set off period. So it's not set off period, but rather we would say that this is an, it is called as incubation period. Right, it is called as incubation period. So incubation period is the amount of time that it takes between the virus coming into the body and it start showing effect. So for example, let's say COVID-19 virus, if it has entered somebody's body today, all right, let's say it has entered my, no, not my body, let's say somebody's body today. So if it has entered somebody's body today, it might take up to 2 weeks of time to start showing effect. So that 2 weeks of time is called as incubation period. Therapeutic agents. Therapeutic agent means everything that can be used in a therapy, a medical therapy. That is called as therapeutic. Please tell when it is uploaded. Can you tell me what context you are asking? Do autosomes of males and females exert different characteristics when they bind with different sex chromosomes? See, that depends, and yes, they would show different characteristics depending on how exactly they are binding. So, yes, in a manner you can say that. Leaderboard. Okay, not able to show the leaderboard for some reason. I'm not sure what's happening, but I'm not able to show leaderboard. It's not giving the option as usual. Anyway, so anyway, I mean, all of you know what mistakes you did, or whether you were the ones who topped today. So if that's the case, congratulations, even though I could not show you the leaderboard. Right. So let's end the class here. I believe it's a Thursday, so you might also have the webinar. So okay, take 5 minutes break and go to the webinar, and please attend it, please. A lot of important topics are being covered there as well. Thank you.